Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You being here is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Hey everybody, welcome to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast. Today I'm speaking with Miss Lauren Simpson. And like Julian, she is a talker, so we're going to be splitting this episode into two parts. It is a lot to learn about, so let's jump into this.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Today I have Miss Lauren Simpson. She is a senior VFX artist at 343 Industries, currently working on the Halo Infinite project. Her past work includes games like God of War, Uncharted 4, along with animated films After Earth, Kung Fu Panda 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2, and so many other awesome games and movies. Lauren, how you doing today?
Good, very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. How's the weather up there in Washington right now?
I don't know if anyone's seen the giant smoke cloud that is passing over us. So it's kind of this weird amber color outside. It's a little apocalyptic. But I hear Oregon, it's like bright orange, and California is also bright orange outside. So, yeah, it's been an interesting year, probably for everyone, no matter where you are.
It's been raining over here in Dallas, and I wish that we could take some of that rain and throw it y'all's way. It'd be super helpful.
Yeah, I know. It's just, that would help us so much. Yeah.
Right. I want to jump into all of the cool stuff that you're working on, but I really kind of want to start from your humble beginnings. Can you tell me, how did you get started in visual effects?
I was thinking about this. How long of a story do you want? No, I don't know. Like, I was born and I had a very odd route. I didn't really use computers in high school, at all. I guess I'm part of the Zennial generation that was kind of straddling between analog and digital. I had an email address, I think. But I was going to go to college for engineering. And that was kind of my parents' idea. And because people would ask me, what are you going to do? I'm like, engineering. They're like, what type? And I'm like, I know nothing about this, other than, my grades in high school have been excellent in math and science. And this makes sense for me. But it wasn't necessarily what I saw myself doing or really understood what that would look like. So I got into engineering and then I switched immediately. And I was like, I'm going to go into theater. My parents were like, what? I did one play my senior year, which was just absolutely amazing. I was so upset that I didn't get more art in high school. So,
What play was that?
Oh, it was Cyrano de Bergerac, which was absolutely it's such a beautiful play. It's this idealist who, he has this upstanding, he's like this perfect ideal person, but he's in love with this woman and she's in love with this complete idiot. And he loves her so much that he helps her win over the heart of this dum-dum. And there's monologues where Cyrano is pretending to be the other guy and everything he's saying is just so eloquent and beautiful. But he knows that the person who's going to get the kiss is the other guy. And it just broke my heart. I'm listening to this backstage. I'm like, I was like, I want to do this with my life. Of course, my mom was like, what? You've been in one play. And I was like, this is so moving to me. I'm not moved by engineering. I don't know how to make a bridge. I don't know. That doesn't sound all that exciting.
I'm just curious, when you were in the play, were you an actor or were you backstage,
I was the duenna, so I was the motherly figure for the main character, who was actually a friend of mine. She was Roxanne. She was the beautiful, dashing. She had this giant wig. It was just luxurious, and she was in the beautiful dress. And I was in some kind of faded wedding dress. It was very yellow by then. And we had it like backwards and like taped up and stuff. But I had so much fun because I felt like not a whole lot was expected of me. I had a few lines that slowly got cut because, we just didn't have enough time to do the whole play. So I did get to like glide through this beautiful world, and I just loved it. The guy who played Cyrano was amazing too. He was just it was wonderful. It was like such a beautiful world. And everyone, someone would talk to you and like you're in character. And I was like, they believe they're that person. Ooh, I'm going to believe that I'm that person too. And I was like, I'm sure I was not a great actor, but I loved the feeling of it. So
that theater experience really said to you, mechanical engineering is for me. So what happened next? Where did life take you?
So I switched into theater at Northwestern, which is a powerhouse for theater. And of course, I'm like, I did one play and I love it. And they're just like, wow, we've been doing plays since we were born. And I was like out of my element completely, But it was wonderful in that they were trying to get us to be artistic creatures. We would read books about Letters to a Young Poet and all these books that were trying to like get at like, what does it mean to be an artist? And I had never really given myself time to think about that. And to be honest, it's going to be just a lifelong process for sure. But, towards my junior year, I think my acting teacher was like, what is it that you want to do? Because I had trouble with the monologues, I wasn't sure how to be an actor. And I was in this group of actors that were just like living and breathing theater. And I definitely felt like a visitor, but a visitor that was having a great time. But at some point I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And I did miss my math and science classes. And so this is kind of the direction that kind of pushed me, I think, back into something more technical. And I was like, what I want to do? I'm going to do theater in the computer. People are like, what? I was like, no, I'm going to be like an actor as an animator. And they're like, oh, like Pixar. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm sure. If I can get there, that'd be great. So I thought, okay, I'll do animation. This is going to be great. And I kind of researched a whole bunch of schools and I was like, I am not a big computer person. I've got to learn this thing. And I actually had been making steps too. I took like one programming class. And I think as a non-computer person, like all of a sudden take a programming class and you're like, you're going to write a little class that does this thing. And then you get to make it do whatever you want. And I was like, wow, this is so powerful. My first like, hello world, like enter. And the computer was like, hello world. I was like, oh, it did what I said. It was like magic. And I was just like, how much more work can this little machine do than, scattered brain that I have? This is amazing. So I made my first like super dumb game of like a chicken crossing the road and you'd like click your mouse and the chicken would move and there were like trucks coming by trying to get your chicken and it had like a little like collision area and if it got close I'd have to do like I have this little function that like checked to see like where each truck was it's like lists and it's like here's a very linear process but then the result is something kind of fun and creative, and I had this other thing where like you click the chicken and it poops and that would like send the truck the other direction. And I had so much fun with this program. Unfortunately, that was the like beginning class and they were definitely like, here's a little crack for you to get into computer science, but you're in for a world of hurt and pain after this. So it was a very good intro class. But then the next class was like data structures. It's like, you're going to learn how to sort lists in like every imaginable possible way. And it got a little bit dry. However, I knew where I was going, like what I wanted from this, like I understood that I had to put in the work in order to get the creative result that I wanted, And so I was like, okay. So I've got this theater thing and I've got this computer science thing that I also think is super fascinating. I was like, now I'm going to apply to schools, And I remember I really wanted to get into the UIC program because they had a VR department that was working on something called the cave. And there were different caves all around like the world and they could come together and you could have this like VR space. When was this? This was like 2002 or so? No, later, 2004. And I was like, VR is going to be the next thing. It's like any day now. And of course, it's going to take quite a lot longer than I thought it would. But I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to work in VR. I want to make these like performance spaces. Oh, this is going to be perfect.
Yeah. And give me a timeline real quick. Like, what was that? Like time when you thought VR was going to get back? Was it like the 90s?
Yeah. So, well, I think I discovered VR, well, when I was doing theater, let's see, I graduated in 2003. So this was like 2001, 2002. I was hearing about Vermal. I don't know if anyone remembers Vermal, but I took another class at Northwestern that was like, you used a web browser to create an environment. And yeah, this also went along with my intro CS class. And I'm like, here it is. It's all these things where, I'm playing a game and I'm also creating an environment. Like we read this book on sacred spaces or something like that, like the different ways that you could make a space compelling or interesting. And like there were different like topics, like maybe there's a beautiful view, but there's no way to see the whole view at one time. So you're always wanting more. And I was like, oh, what a beautiful psychology thing. So I like set up this kind of maze where you could see like this inner garden, like from different angles, but never like the whole thing all at once. So it required you to like spend time. And I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, I was all in, a program that you did not do any scripting at all, but it was very visual, the way you like put different blocks. Like I had these roses and they were just spheres with a rose texture on it, but I used my imagination. I could pretend like that was a beautiful rose. Instead, I like looked back at it like later and it was like, oh, look, it's a sphere with a rose texture on a little green stick. But to me at the time, those were real flowers. And it's amazing with the, if you're connected to a space, you forgive it for, any of its sort of shortcomings. Like, I see old games that I played as a kid, and in my mind, they were like mist. It was one frame per mouse click, I mean, in my head though, like that world was so rich and full. And I remember going back and be like, oh yeah, you needed to click them. There's not even a frames per second to describe that. Mouse click frame per second, the speed of which you could click, but it didn't matter because your imagination is so powerful. And that's, I think, also why I enjoyed theater, because so much of it is your imagination and what you bring to the experience. And I do think that's what I'm skipping around all over the place, but I think that's what brought me into games, because I did love film, but it is more static. It's a beautiful image, but you're not bringing, that's wrong, but you are bringing yourself to a film because you get to interpret. There's editing and there's the feeling that you get from a film, absolutely. But in a game, you are a participant actively creating, I think, with the game in a way.
Right, it's total immersion.
Yeah. You get to decide what you want to look at, what interests you. So, and that's sort of what I was trying to create with this sort of Vermal VR space, is like, how do I think about a person who is thrown into this environment, and how do I give them things that interest them or compel them to go forward? Or, I'd watch other people play it and I'd be like, wow, I never thought you would want to go around the perimeter. There's really nothing there. And then I was like, oh, let's do it. And so I ended up putting these like giant spiky creatures that like go so you can like go outside the perimeter. But then the idea is that you're supposed to feel like you're being encroached by these things that don't want you there, and I was just like, this is all to like keep you in the garden, and I was like, and it was sort of the beginnings. I didn't know it at the time. That's sort of like the beginnings of like being a bit of a game designer, is like trying to figure out how to give people freedom, but at the same time, like let them feel like they're picking the route that you kind of want them to go. So, but I mean, if someone wanted to sit there and fight the spiky things, you couldn't really fight them, but you might come up with the game, like, where are they going to go? Can I dance around their legs? Ooh, this is actually really fun. And like, that's a totally valid way to interact with that space as well. And that's, I'm sorry, I got super off topic. I guess that was about 2002, 2003. And yeah, I thought, you know what? VR is going to be here any day now. And we're all going to be in these like crazy worlds, like making these performance spaces. And, I read Snow Crash and I was like, yeah, we're going to have avatars. I don't know if you're familiar with, Neil Stephenson. I love Neil Stephenson so much. He comes up with these like super crazy worlds with like, Snow Crash is like.
Is he a book author?
Like VR. Yeah. Neil Stephenson is a book author. And Snow Crash is a book that I like quite a lot. And people were, they had avatars. It was kind of like Second Life, where, you have this world that's VR that, you're all interacting in, and, you're having meetings, and they talk about how important it was to have like facial expressions that, translated into your avatar. And yeah, I was like, this is all coming together. Of course, this is like way too early for any of that. I was like, I'm going to figure out how to do theater in VR. It's going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
So the long story short, it still hasn't quite happened yet, although I still am trying to pay as close attention to it as I can, because I had a friend who said they had Hamlet in a VR space where you could actually watch the play as if it was kind of small, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, because it doesn't sound like it's in normal scale. It's like scaled down so that you could like watch like Hamlet. I was like, oh wow, that would be fascinating. I still haven't seen it, but I've heard about it. I hear more about VR than I actually experience it, and I am really hoping that at some point, I'll get to play.
Yeah, let's come back to that question on VR and kind of where visual effects fits into it later. But
sure,
just keep talking to me. Like, you were kind of going that route with graphics, and you'd moved over and finished up at Northwestern, and kind of what ended up leading to kind of getting your first job in the field.
Yeah. So UIC with the cool VR cave, I did not get accepted. Oh, I was so disappointed. I applied to 3 schools. I applied to Texas A&M because I knew about their program, but I knew it was much more in the entertainment area. They were like, oh yeah, our graduates go to Pixar, they go to ILM, they go to DreamWorks. Like, this is an industry job just waiting for you. And I was like, that sounds awesome, but I really am kind of weird, and I would kind of love to do more academic, like VR stuff, but they asked me to apply to either the technical side or the artistic side for UIC. And I was so bummed because I was like, I'm both and neither. You guys are killing me. It's like, if you want to apply the CS route, you have to like give a lot of examples of your computer science work. And, I had data structures, and I had this chicken game that looked really bad, but I loved it dearly, but it was not an impressive piece of work. And, C++ object-oriented programming. And I was like, none of this stuff is going to wow them. So I went the art route. I was like, okay, here's my artistic portfolio. Here's my verbal project. And I was like, oh, this is a really weak art application. But if I could include my computer science, I think it would make me more an attractive, option for them to accept. They had already structured it that way. They're like, we want artists, or we want programmers. And I was like, oh, you're killing me. And I didn't get in. But I did get into A&M. So I was like, okay, Texas A&M it is. And I remember getting there, and I was just like, I'm interested in animation. They're like, we don't do that. And I kind of knew that, but they're more TD, like technical director type strengths. And I had lots of, artistic classes, but they were like, we often train people to be in effects. And it's really funny because at the time I was like, well, I don't know if I really like explosions, I was like, but you know what? This is fine. I'll do this because I like to program. I've got this bizarre, theater background. I have never used Maya. I had heard of it, but I had never used it before. And, I did my application on a VHS. That's like how old I am. So I was like, look at my verbal world that's like this garden. And I'm sure it like looked really dinky, but I actually like filmed it and put it on a VHS because they said we can't play DVDs. It's not always compatible with our player. So I'm like, okay, fine. Well, here's a VHS. So I think in a drawer somewhere I have like my Texas A&M application as a big fat VHS.
Oh man, and you think about it nowadays, like you just pull out your smartphone and take a selfie video and just upload it to the internet. And
the amount of power in this little rectangle just sometimes takes my breath away. I mean, the things that you can do now compared to, and I was like, well, when I was a kid, I was digging in the dirt with the spoon. And now my son, who is not quite 4, he can like sit there and be like, I'm going to look at the planets. Like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what? It's like, spoiled kids these days, At the same time, I got to be honest, I wouldn't, trade having that sort of more analog childhood because I think it balances someone out. I'm trying very hard to get Jamie to go out to the garden with me and like learn about plants and dirt, have those moments where he's digging up the dirt with the good spoons. Because spoiler, I still dig in the dirt with the good spoons. I'm just old enough to know better, but I'm sorry, I totally got off topic again. Where were we?
Okay, so you made it into Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. Okay, Texas A&M. So sorry. They had a lot of help for people getting into the industry. Like the group ahead of me, like Pixar came to visit like once a year to like look at reels and give us a lot of guidance. And ILM also came to recruit. I mean, they loved it there. And I was like, okay, I just got to figure out what discipline I'm interested in, you know? And of course I was interested in animation, and everyone's like, look, everyone wants to be an animator. Look, it's like football. Don't be the quarterback, be the rock star who is, you know, like holding the line. It was Texas, you know, Texas. Everyone talks about football metaphors. So I forget because, yeah, you're in Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah. And you went to a school that is pretty famous for their football team, at least in the college space.
Yes. I grew up in Houston. I was a cheerleader in high school. It's hard to believe, but yeah, they feel like different lives now. I was trying very hard to be a good Texan, but I'm like, I don't like hot sauce. They're like, what's wrong with you? You know? So I was a bit of a grumpy Texas A&M. I never went to any of the football games. Anyway, I was at Texas A&M, and everyone was like, look, this is a 2-year program that's going to take you 4 years. And that, you know, it's tough. My parents are like, so when are you going to get a job? And it took a long time because I remember using Maya. I was like, I don't understand Maya. I remember I have this very specific memory of I'd never worked on model before. I was trying to model this cute sheep or whatever. We had a section that was about animals, you know, and I was like, great, I'm going to model a sheep in NERP. What are NERPs? I don't know. They're just balls. I just stick the balls like cotton balls. This is like an art project, but in the computer. And I remember at one point, or maybe it was Polyas, I don't know. I remember at one point, I accidentally hit a number key on my keyboard, and it made everything wireframe, or everything like was in a different mode. And I was like, the computer deleted all of my stuff. You know, I'm like in the computer lab, like, where did my sheep go? You know, and somebody like came over, they're like, oh, that's a viewing mode. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, they started pushing the numbers. I was like, see, this is full render. This is with lighting. This is with that. And that like blew my mind, because it was like instant like change of like what I was looking at. And I was like, there is so much more to this program. What am I going to do? I don't know this at all. You know, it was a lot of work. The first year was very much trial by fire. It was still somewhat acceptable to come into a program like that and not have an actual CG background. The classes after me, like 2 or 3 years after me, they all came in with like beautiful, like, you know, car renders and like they knew everything. They were like, oh yeah, I've been using Maya since I was, 12, and it was such a jump from like, my year, which maybe had a smattering of backgrounds, to like everyone here has been perfectly trained in order to get into this program. And I think that's also why my route was very kind of meandering, because I don't think it was quite an accepted track to follow yet. And I think just the information wasn't out there because there was no YouTube. There was nothing to, I think, help guide people, at least nothing that I saw. I happen to know about A&M because I had an artist friend who was like, he was in the architecture program at Texas A&M. And he was like, they have this grad program that does amazing stuff. Like, things that you see in like, Ants or the CG movies that are coming out right now. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. And so I never forgot that conversation. I think that's what definitely prompted me to find the program. And part of it, I guess, was just already being in Texas, So I got a little lucky there, to be honest. But yeah, I was like, okay, animation maybe is not the thing for me. For a brief moment, I was like, I'm going to be a map painter. And like, do map painting. Like, if you like computer science, like, do something on the technical side. So I got into rigging, and I was like, I really love rigging because, like, if I can't be an actor, at least I can do the puppet for the actor that's going to make him, do cool stuff. And it was very engineering-like. I think it was very much in my wheelhouse in that, there were different ways of, setting up a skeleton to get it to move in interesting way. The spine was just unbelievably complicated, like all the twisting motions and the, keeping your collarbone in a certain direction. And it was fascinating. It's like, do you want the head to move with the shoulder? Do you want it to stay in place? Like, and I think I'm always drawn to things that tell me about, real life, because it's like, oh, it's all in the computer. It's like, yes, but I've never thought about, it's like, yes, I know I have a skeleton, but how amazing is this that when I turn my arm, my elbow does not move. It's like, there are 2 bones here. I never thought about any of this. And I think anytime that like happens in my brain, like I'm like instantly like drawn to it. So I got really into rigging and I got really into characters.
And you make a really good point here, because any discipline that you want to specialize in, there are those complementary disciplines next to them. And animation being an example where rigging is a part of that. And everything comes down to observation, even in effects when we're like observing natural phenomenon. So here on the camera, you're moving your arm and kind of watching how your muscles like move to it. And that's how riggers have to think about it too. And I understand there's a big component to like learning human anatomy, which kind of makes it even more amazing when you think about how riggers and animators, you know, manage creatures, and especially supernatural creatures, but they're using like animals as reference to create those.
Right. I remember there was some animated movie that had like this kangaroo that had a double knee. I don't remember what it was called, but I remember just watching this movie and just being like, I wonder what the riggers did to figure out how this thing would move. How so interesting, you know, all that was fascinating. It was just, again, just kind of stepping into a world that had like so much to learn from was really exciting to me. And I think all that is still there. I mean, I think as an artist, you're sort of the product of everything you've ever loved. So all of it is relevant. It's not like, you know, any of my tangents were, you know, for naught, you know, they were all get rolled into the way I view the world and the way, you know, how I make art, you know. And I think it's all in the subconscious. You know, it's like maybe thinking about how the human body moves in rigging doesn't always make its way maybe in a direct manner into like my effects. But I think that process has, you know, changed how my brain likes to think about things. So I don't know. I am someone who likes to follow their interests. So, you know, I ultimately didn't become a rigger, but
what did you become?
Well, I became an effects artist because I took a class in physically based modeling, which was writing your own particle simulation in OpenGL. And I didn't really know what you even did with that. You know, they were like, oh yeah, you do flocking. I'm like, flocking like birds? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll take that class. It sounds really good. They're like, yeah, the teacher, the professor, Dr. House is like really amazing. And I think he's at Clemson now, which also has a really good program. So he was such a good teacher. I learned so much because it was all programming. And again, this is back to like that, my little chicken game. It's like, I'm programming things that have a visual component. So all of a sudden I'm like, you know, here's a little particle. And at the next time step, where is it going to be? The next time step, where is it going to be? And like, all the calculations that go into figuring out where that one little particle is going to be in the next step is like super fascinating because you have all, it's like, here are all the accumulation of forces, you know, and what forces do you want to exert on this little particle? And I read some very interesting things about metaphorically how to like think about a particle as like one life, you know, it has a lifespan, it has these properties, and then it goes about its way and it just keeps taking its step, keeps taking a step. And I was just like, oh, what a beautiful metaphor for life, all these little particles, you know, and I just, you make these wonderful patterns, and you're just like, oh, there's this feeling of like creating something that, you know, you've set up the parameters, but then it just goes, and it's so exciting to see what it does. Because if I thought about, in my mind, I can't picture what will a million of these things look like? You know, like I can't figure that out as like a big picture thing, but I can set up different rules and let them run. And then all of a sudden they do things that I don't expect. And it's so exciting because I think that's so much of like creativity is like you have these things that start out and then it just kind of grows into this thing that you didn't, and it's so exciting. Like I really loved that class. It was very much like, what happens when I do this? What happens when I do this? You know, and some of the like things were like, your ball must bounce off all four walls and it would like fall through. And you're like, no, it's not doing the behavior that I want.
Was that your aha moment when you said, this is what I want to do?
You know, to be honest, it was like everything else, like, wow, what a huge, fascinating thing that I could spend my entire life on. And I don't know how much depth I will get to, but I really enjoy this. And I ended up making my own kind of animated project. And I remember having this character like run through a field of dandelions. And I ended up attaching the dandelions to my particle simulation and have them just fly off. And then I had like a shot where they're flying off to the moon. And, you know, I had like some spring forces on them, which I don't know was like appropriate for dandelions. But that was like me trying to take this idea and like, what do I want to do creatively with it? And I had that on my reel. And so when DreamWorks came to recruit, I had a reel that was like, here's my rigging stuff, here's some artwork, here's some effects. And they saw the like dandelions and various other things I had done in the effects realm. And they're like, we do this kind of thing all the time. And I was like, oh, you do? Because I just thought, I came up with this weird idea, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we'll take, positions of particles and then we'll replace it with geometry, or we'll do all kinds of things. Like effects is a really interesting field, and it kind of is, I don't know, the catch-all for all the things that no one has quite figured out where to put them. They end up kind of in effects. And I was like, I like that idea because I don't feel like I fit into any kind of box either. So I was like, this does sound good. And DreamWorks was like, well, we have this program for recent grads that you can join if you would like. We're offering you a position in this program. It's called the VFX Challenge. And we're going to do more things like what you're showing us on your reel. It's like, particle simulations, or, they talked about all kinds of programming. It was like, oh, you want to do something procedurally. And I don't even know if I knew the word exactly. Like I had some vague idea of what it was. It's like, again, it's like setting up rules to do something complicated that you couldn't do by hand. And I was like, yeah, I'm really interested in that. Again, because you've got all the power of a computer, and then you set up a situation that you let run and have these beautiful patterns or this beautiful result happen. And I was like, yeah, I really am drawn to this. This sounds really good. And yeah, so that's how I kind of ended up in effects. And I thought of effects as like explosions. I don't know. I mean, explosions are great, but I don't know if I really want to do explosions. Although I do explosions now and I really do love them. So I should say that anything I'm like, oh, that's not for me. And then I like get into it. I was like, no, this is all interesting. This is all fascinating. I do love this.
You never know till you try.
You never know. Yeah. And I constantly reminded that I don't know what I'm talking about. So it doesn't bode well for you putting this up for other people to listen to. I think being open to new things and trying to figure out, like, everything could be your teacher, and I think that's something that I have learned over maybe the years, is just don't dismiss anything. Like, everything can tell you something. There was a quote in Superman that I love. It's like Lex Luthor, and he's like, some people can read War and Peace and think it's a simple tale. Others can unlock the secrets of the universe with a packet of ingredients on the packet of a chewing gum, wrapper or something like that. And I was like, that's what you want to be. You want to be the one to be like, Zorbital, this is fascinating, I don't know.
That's awesome, Lauren.
Hey, I butchered that quote. I've got to go look it up and see how off I was on that. And I guess that's why I end up doing a lot of different things, because you just never know what all those things will teach you. They're all your teachers.
Okay, I know we got a lot of ground to cover still.
I know.
So I definitely.
No, we're on question 1. Okay,
we
got
definitely
into effects through DreamWorks, and they picked my reel out. So yay.
So talk to me, what you feel like real-time visual effects is, kind of in your own words. How would you define that to somebody who has no idea about what visual effects are?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between how I explain it to my mom and how I explain it maybe to someone who's in the industry. To my mom, I'm like, explosions! Or I say waterfalls, anything. Or sometimes if it's a person who I think has a tendency to be poetic, I'm going to be like, I'm an elemental magician in the computer, I kind of like that description too, because, we're often trying to get fire, water, air, earth to do something for us. And those things they change form. And I think it is a particularly tricky discipline, I guess, particularly tricky thing to get good at. I mean, yeah, and of course the real-time part is so fascinating to me because it has the potential to be different every time. If you can find a way to have it surprise you. I think that's always what I'm looking for. It's like, I want to be surprised. I don't want something to always turn out the same way every single time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why I liked real-time VFX, in games as opposed to film. Because, film, you can throw millions of particles at the screen and get just super nuanced, little emotion, and you can freeze it. It's like a pressed flower. It's beautiful, but it's going to be that way forever. And I do appreciate the beauty of it. But there is something very exciting about something that's growing and changing and that you can't predict. And then it surprises me. And I love that about the real-time part of real-time VFX. So like if I could do something real-time that, I didn't expect. I have a funny story about some fish I worked on at Naughty Dog. And I had all these scripts to like control these fish. They were super interesting. Like they had different homing positions and they knew where you were as the player. And so they would find different spots to like swim to. So they would swim away from you and find a new home. Well, if you played through this level, at the very end, somehow the fish would escape the water and they would be in the air. And I was like, they're trying to evolve. They're trying to be something more than they are. And of course, it's like 2 a.m. because that's like how we work there. And they were like, okay, Lauren, that's totally a bug. You're going to have to fix it. So I would sit there and I'd be like, okay, fish, your Y position. I'm going to clamp you to the level of the water. And sorry, as soon as you get closer to it, I'm going to start adding velocity to make you curve downward. And I had all this control on these scripts. It was so much fun. But they kept escaping. I was just like, they want to live. And I was like probably half crazy at this point, but
2 a.m. in the morning.
2 a.m. in the morning, just like my fish, they've gained sentience, I just love that. And someone would like look at my script and like, okay, what is it doing? And it was like 100 lines that were all like these bizarre, it's like, what is this doing? And I was like, oh, well, sometimes if it's been going in this direction too long, I add up the velocities. And then if it's been going that way too long, I, even if they're not close to their home position, I turn them, and then, why? Like, because it's fun, because they have a little animal brain that I've programmed in. And of course it's like, that's not a typical effects thing. I didn't know, because I was just like, here's a playground of scripts that you can work on it. And it had like images that defined, their blend shapes, like the way the fish moved. And I could like play around with at what part in the image does it start from? Because it would be like, oh, here's a line of pixels that show how the tail is moving. What was so fun is you could look at these images that would describe the movement of the fish, and they were beautiful patterns. And I was like, oh, look at that. I remember like talking to my effects lead. I was like, look at this. This is, I think it was like a bird or something. And we were looking at that. We're just like, look at that. Look at that. It has, you can tell that image has interesting patterns and organization to it. And of course, when something's moving, it's got cycles and the colors were like swaying back and forth. It's like, it felt like the Matrix, they're like looking at all the code and they're just like, hey, blonde, redhead, blah, 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 it's like the color Matrix. Again, it was like probably really late at night. I think the brain tends to wander. But he was like, yeah, I would wear a shirt with that pattern. I was like, right? It would be so cool to like pick out patterns that were like based off of movement. It's like you can see, your brain knows that there's complexity there, that it's not random. So anyway, shoot, I got off topic.
It's all good. So I'm going to jump around here. We'll kind of go around. I want to start by asking Lauren, what does your workflow look like for creating a new effect from start to finish? How do you kind of like structure how you handle creating effects?
I like having context, and that sometimes flies in the face of the timeline that I've been given. It's probably not surprising that I always want more time than they give me. But I always start out like, what does the player want to feel when they see this? And I think that absolutely comes from my like theater background. Is this a bad guy effect or is this a good guy effect? It's like, do I want to go towards this or do I want to go away from it? Is it beautiful and I'm drawn in, or is it terrifying and I need to go away from it? And a lot of that gives me an idea of like what it is I want, because there's so many decisions that could be made. Like you could make an explosion that is a successful explosion, or you can make an explosion that, I don't know, something bad has happened and this explosion is not a good explosion. Yes, you can reuse everything, but if I can get the feeling right, it's hard to judge. If I see the effect that I've done and I feel the way that I think someone needs to feel like when this happens, and a lot of the explosions I'm doing are like, success, you blew up the thing, and of course it's like, and it's got like, it's big and it's epic, and it's like, okay, yeah, I feel good. I feel good after that explosion happened, But sometimes there's like, I got one thing on God of War that was like, well, it's this ball of light, and it swirls around and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, but is it a ball of light that I'm supposed to kill? Or am I supposed to collect it? What am I doing with it? It's like, just make the light. I was like, no, it cannot just make the light. And of course, they're just like, oh, Lauren, come on. We have this huge spreadsheet of tasks and you're asking what the light's motivation is. And I was like, I absolutely am, and I had a really good producer on God of War that helped try to convince me that I couldn't always have all the context that I wanted. So there are times when I'm like, okay, this thing smokes and it goes away. I just have to do it. I don't have to have the whole context. But
I think
if I can start out with that.
That's so important, right? Like you as an effects artist want to be working in tandem with the designers, whether it be combat or cinematics or whatnot, because there has to be a motivation or a reason for an effect to exist.
Yes.
And thinking back to like Julian's talk, the GDC side, you're not just throwing a whole bunch of different emitters together and saying that's an effect. It has to have a reason. You have every right, Lauren, to be, pushing that. And I'm glad you brought it up because every single artist should question that whenever they're creating effect. Whether they're on a team and their team's not giving it to them, they need to be asking their team to give it to them, or they need to create it themselves. It's one or the other.
Yeah. I'm always fighting for that. And I feel like I shouldn't have to fight, that it should be, kind of a given. But I'm often talking to producers that, they're looking at the schedule. They're looking at, the number of days left and blah, 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 blah. It's like, oh, if Lauren could just knock this out in a day, then we could, and of course I'm like, well, what is the life motivation? I know they're just like, oh, please, but it's so important. And I think I really fight for the idea that if you make artists happy, your game will be happy because you're going to get a collection of people who are trying so hard to make meaning. And that's what I want in a game. It's just not just, poofs and sparkles just going off everywhere. It's like, it really works when I want to move towards something. I want to move away from something. I feel the most successful games, I think, are games that really are just dripping with meaning. Like I love Death Stranding. I don't know if that's any of your questions.
What does a life in the day of Lauren look like from sunrise to sunset? Maybe pre-COVID or during COVID, I guess.
It's tricky because I'm a mom, so there's a lot of mom things that I do. I guess I'll take a normal day from what's been going on with COVID because I finally, I think, got a little of a routine going. I have a coffee pot next to my bed that turns on as an alarm, which I like because then instead of having this like wake me up every morning, instead it's the fresh smell of coffee and a water gurgling, and that generally just wakes me up. I have a backup alarm just in case I'm so exhausted that I don't wake up to it. But then I probably needed to have a little extra sleep if that happens. So it actually kind of regulates itself. But yeah, usually like 6:30, 7, I kind of wake up with a delicious cup of coffee. And if I can, I can work on something that's a personal project of mine. I've been doing a lot of music lately. And I do like to start the day with something that's for me. I have found that's helped me a lot just to, kind of make life work. Get out my frustrations on a personal project. But that's only, until my son wakes up, which depends. It's like 8 if I'm lucky.
And he's 4 now, right?
And he's almost 4. Yeah, he's almost 4. So yeah, I'll be like playing, some guitar part, and all of a sudden on the baby monitor, I'll hear, mommy. And I'm like, okay, well, there we go. We'll just push pause on whatever project I'm doing. And then I go down and I give him a hug and, kind of let him wake up. And then I play with Jamie for however long until work starts, which is 10. A lot of people get in earlier, but, it's nice for me to have time with my son because I'm at work all day. So yeah, and then I kind of, right now, my work is upstairs. So I just go upstairs and my husband's watching Jamie while I'm working right now. Yeah, he's got like a big task list of things and, trying to make sure I'm working on the thing that's most important or affects downstream teams the most. And lunch break, I have this garden in my yard that it's been kind of nice with the working from home because at lunchtime I can go outside and go water my garden, and it just gives me a little bit of time, when there's not like, smoke in the air or other apocalyptic problems going on. It's nice to just kind of be outside and, smell the fresh air. And I think being at a computer all day, every day, I've found that over the years makes me feel a little bit unbalanced. So trying to get some more outdoor time, I think has helped. And so, yeah, at lunch, I try to be outside a little. And then I also play with Jamie, and playing with Jamie often ends up being like me holding Mr. Potato Head while he tells me that I'm doing it wrong. And, I think being a mom is a very strange thing, because I'm at work and I'm doing all these effects, and then it's like I have to go and my son needs to poop and I have to wipe his bottom. It's the difference between the things I do, for family and the things I'm doing at work is sometimes a bit crazy, especially working from home. They blend a lot more. Before I would get in my car and I do my commute and I would be at work for that amount of time for the whole day. And then I would come home and it was very separate, but now it's just all kind of mixed and blended in. And, Jamie opens the door and kind of gets into my video conferences and they're like, oh, he's so cute. I'm like, Jamie, he's on the conference. I can't. You want to sit in my lap? And I was like, hey, Jamie's going to sit in my lap while I'm listening. And, everyone's been all right with that. And it is funny when it's like, he's like picking his nose. I'm like, stop it. Everyone can see you, buddy.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then, once I finish, my day, which, we're towards the crunchy part of what we're doing, but I'm trying very hard to keep regular hours because, I want to go have dinner with Jamie. I want to, make his macaroni and cheese and, clean up the milk he spilled, all those things that, they're not always glamorous, but that is part of like being a mom, is all the kind of unglamorous stuff that is actually very meaningful. So, picking which color cup he wants. And it's like such a simple thing. But I remember as a kid really caring about certain things. And then sometimes adults just didn't know that they were important, and I would get so upset. I'd be like, no, the color of my cup for, apple juice is really important to me. And they'd just be like, here's the one that's clean. I'm just like, oh, and I know it's silly, but, I try to remember those things, and if Jamie wants the blue cup, well, he gets the blue cup. And of course people are like, you can't give him everything he wants. I was like, I know, but some things are really important. I'm trying to figure out what are the things he cares about and what are the things that we could let go. And that's not an easy line to figure out. So anyways, there's a lot of mom things that I do in my day. He doesn't usually go to bed until about 9. He fights bedtime. And it's like, it's okay, buddy. I fought bedtime too. I kicked a TV over on myself when I had a babysitter and I didn't want to go to bed because I was such a problem kid and I didn't mean to be. I just, I told Jamie, I'm like, buddy, I get it. Bedtime is not fun. But we're going to read a book. We're going to do all these things. And we're going to get in bed. And I lay down with him. People are just like, oh, he needs to learn to go to bed by himself. I was like, I remember being just totally scared as a kid. It's dark, I want my water. What if I wake up in the middle of the night and I can't get water, So I give him his apple juice. It's watered down so he doesn't get terrible cavities. I kind of wait till he falls asleep. And then by then it's like 10 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, my day is so full, So then I'm like, okay, I have to make myself maybe a hot cup of tea and then decide, can I work on some music project stuff? Or, my poor husband, I talk to him. So, like, how's your day been? What have you been doing today? Sometimes we watch a TV show, but I fall down the hole of watching too much TV. And then when I look back over the year and I'm like, oh, I could really cut down on TV. I've been kind of trying to do that. So we'll sometimes watch a show or two. I really try to question, is this something that I'm honestly getting something out of? Or am I just shutting off? I only have so much time.
I think all of us kind of run into that rut of guilt where we feel like we constantly need to be productive and working on, the portfolio piece or the side project or whatever kind of, thing that's contributing as a producer, when sometimes it's okay to be selfish and, spend time to relax, to enjoy, whatever kind of mindless thing that just kind of takes you outside your own brain, and you don't have to overanalyze or critically think about it. And for some people, that's TV watching. For many of us, it's just playing video games or reading a book or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with it, but
there's nothing wrong with it.
Right? Everything in moderation.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I just always want to make sure that I make the choice, you know? It's like, hey, I know how I'm feeling right now, and I really need to just shut off, and I'm going to watch this thing, you know, and be okay with that. Like, I think letting the guilt go. I think when I was younger, I was like, I must make every minute count, blah, 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 blah. And then I would just be burnt out, frazzled, you know? And I think I'm trying to get better at that, to like realize that I'm a person without infinite energy and I can't just continue to caffeinate myself to get everything done. That's not a healthy way to be. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to know myself as much as I can. Like, I want to know the things that I need, and when can I push myself because it's important, or when do I need to be really careful and say, you know what, I'm going to go to bed early because being rested means that I'm going to enjoy the day, as opposed to going, I have all these things I want to do and I'm not enjoying any of them. And it's no good. That doesn't work either. So, and again, lifelong process. And my time is so compressed because I have added almost like a second job to my job, which is, I don't want to call it a job, but just spending time with Jamie, knowing that he's only going to be little for so long. And, if I spend an hour like holding Mr. Potato Head, it's like I'm watching him play, and that's okay too. I think slowing down is something that I had to learn when I became a parent, because I was just like, I'm wasting time, this isn't the maximum amount of time usage, blah, 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 blah. And sort of appreciating the moments where we're running outside, screaming at the sky, going pterodactyl, it's like those things are just as important. And Jamie's exercising his imagination, and I'm trying to meet him with that, and that it's not like a waste of time. I did think that it was kind of like, I'm not gonna do this mom thing. There's just so much like just idle time, and like trying to make sure that I appreciate it is kind of a goal of mine. So yeah, that really takes me to like 10 p.m. to like midnight, or maybe 11:30. Like I get like an hour and a half where it's like, what do I want to do with this hour and a half? Yeah,
I think it's kind of like a lot of times when you're young and single or not, attached, you're scared of having kids. And when you finally have one, finally make it through that process of, pregnancy or whatever, and you see his face and you see him sleeping there just so peacefully, that's when it clicks, and it's like, it's all worth it. He gives me, reason to live and to have hope for the future, and I don't want to F it up. That's always what's going through your mind.
Here's a funny thought. I was like, when you're like playing a video game and you find the boss's weakness, like you're playing, you're just like, so it's so difficult. But all of a sudden it's like, there's this like blinky thing on its shoulder. You're like, yeah. There's its weakness and I can get back, and it's so funny because I thought this when like my son was born. I was just like, oh my gosh, there's this huge weakness that I have. That's a thing that is not connected to me, that anything happened to this little creature. Like, it's hard to like process that at first. And I thought about it like in a metaphor of a game. It's like, here it is, if I was a boss, this would be my weakness, this little thing that's gonna go off and have his own life. And I was just like, this is gonna be hard. It was hard in a way that I wasn't expecting, I guess.
Yeah. Because
so much changes when you become a parent. It is like the most amazing thing ever. But I won't pretend for any minute that it's easy, but it's, very, very, very worth it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the awesome projects that you've been working on over games and film. Right now, you're working on the Halo Infinite campaign, creating Object FX and improving internal tools for your team to work with. Can you describe to me a little bit about your experience with Halo Infinite, and maybe tell us what exactly Object FX are?
Yeah, so to be honest, I haven't put effects on objects as like a description of like what it is that I'm doing. Like that's kind of a new thing. I guess on Uncharted, I worked on a fire torch that absolutely loved. And so it was just like, great, it'll be like objects like that where, I'm describing the movement of something that's like attached to a player or attached to a character. But they're like, no, that's character effects. And I was like, oh, okay. So every studio, I think, has different like kind of departments in the way we're kind of organized. Yeah, a lot of these objects are like, press a button to make an elevator go, or something came out of the ground and then you shoot at it and it, explodes, or I don't want to go into too many details, but they're objects out in the world that need effects on them, but they're not characters. And so I was like, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. I gotta be honest, I don't think I had done any explosions at all. Since even though I'm like the one effects artist, because it always came up, it's like, hey, we've got this big explosion, and there was always somebody who really wanted that. And I was always like, I will do, waterfalls and butterflies and insects and all these other things. And sometimes those are the things that are not high in demand. And I was always like, no, I love this stuff. So I often went for those types of effects. But I think on production, sometimes there's just a space to be filled, and you gotta just step up and do whatever it is that needs to be done. And I was like, I don't have a lot of experience doing this. So, the ramp up was a little bit tricky. Again, every studio has a different way of handling communication between the game and your effect. And my experience before was like, oh, I have a scripting, kind of language that I can get at. But that's not always how it was set up. So I had to learn a completely different way of working. And I think that does make effects exciting and a little frustrating, because it's just like, oh, it's taking me so long to ramp up on how this thing works. I have to know, like, what is the health of this thing? Like, as it's taking damage, what happens to it? And that I'm kind of responsible for communicating how the player is doing if it's an object that they're interacting with, and some of that I don't always control, because, it kind of comes set up already. And then I'm trying to say, well, as a player, what do I expect when I press this? Is this getting across the idea? Sometimes seeing it in context can be a technical challenge. So there's been a lot of, here's a list of things that you need to do to check off. And I'm like, I don't do as well with the long list of things to check off. But, I understand that it's an efficient way of tracking things. Yeah. So I'm trying really hard, but I gotta be honest, it's been a challenge, because I like to work very creatively and organically. And that doesn't always line up with like a checklist that I don't want to miss anything. But at the same time, like, it's just really hard to have that be my starting place, I owned a level at Naughty Dog. And the way I figured out what I needed to work on was I played the game. I just ran around and I was like, oh, this needs work, or this isn't working, or, I was a player, I was a participant, but sometimes that's not how things have been set up for you. So, I'm adjusting. I'm trying to adjust. So I've got these objects that I often have to see kind of out of context, and I'm trying very hard to make them work. And I'm trying to use my imagination of like, what will they be and what do I need to tell the player? Cool. So, yeah. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Well, okay. Yeah.
I was looking at some of the breakdowns of your previous effects on your Vimeo page, and we talked about it a little during your education, but you really have a knack for programming with a big emphasis on MEL, which is, I guess, Maya Embedded Language Scripting. I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about some of the amazing things you can do with that skill, and how other artists can maybe use it and learn it and apply it in their own effects.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what engine you're using, how much scripting you have access to. I mean, scripting is kind of the ultimate. As long as you have access to variables and things, you can do so many interesting creative things with it. I was joking with another artist at Naughty Dog, because we both came up with the same idea where we were using a random function. We were just like, oh, we want this thing to happen between a random value between 1 and 0 and 1 maybe. But then we also want to put a random on the maximum too. So you're like random between 0 and random 0.81. It's like each one has a different range as well. And then you can nest them. So all of a sudden you're like, I want most of them to act like this, but just every once in a while, a couple to like escape the group, And so you do that with all these nested randoms. And it was so funny because I feel like we both came to that conclusion, like completely independently. Because he saw my script. He's like, you do that too. And I was like, oh yeah, I know, right? And I think a scripting environment like gives you all these different things to play with. And I love it because if I want to make a variable and accumulate data and then make a conclusion from that data and then do something different. Like if I can have an if statement, it's like, if once I've accumulated all this stuff and I've looked at it and it's this, then I want to do this, and all of a sudden you get these really bizarre behaviors, and not even bizarre. I mean, sometimes they don't work. And it's like, oh, that was an interesting experiment. That looks terrible, And it's like, why does it look terrible? It's like, what is it that is not working? What does it feel like, And so it's like such a technical, like, data flow of information, but yet the great thing about real-time visual effects is you see it right away. You could sit there and run it and make a change, and run it, make a change. And like, again, you have to have enough time. You have to have someone who trusts you to give you the time to play. So, that often ends up being in more of a R&D phase if you can get to that. But like I was talking about with the fish at Naughty Dog, I could get the engine to pass me data about where the player was. And then I actually set up like gameplay objects like in the water, like here's a home position for the fish. Here's a home position for the fish. And I like work with another guy who is super technical. He's like, I can set you up these graphs like really easily. He's like, all you have to do is just put the points in different spots and I'll draw you the positions. And then your effect can query this list of positions. I'll package it up for you so you can unpack it. And I was like, this is amazing. I went to town. I was just like, I'm going to put all these little like, oh, the fish want to be in the little kelp over here, or behind the rock, and I had so much fun. And all that was through scripting, because I'd be like, hey, fish, you're going to check where the player is. Are they close to you? Oh, do this. Are they not close to you? Oh, well, you're going to have a timer because you maybe don't want to hang out in the kelp forever. So maybe you want to go someplace else. I'll give you a timer, but I'm going to make it random because I don't know. Maybe you're not feeling moving from your kelp bed. How long do I want you to stay there? And it was so fun. I had so much fun with that. It was like making a little fish brain, and then the fire torch, I had access to Mel. And I could say, I was like, particle, where did you start from? And it could store that value. And it's like, as you get further away from where you started, I want you to change color, And so I would put that value, like the distance from your start, I would put that into a number, and then I would send it to the shader. And the shader would get this number, and depending on, the number, I would say, I want you to be like more blue or more yellow or more red. And I could make all these colors, because you look at fire. I love fire. I absolutely love fire because it has so many different colors. Like I love like now being in a campfire. It's just fascinating. It is so always in motion. And I talk about movies a lot, but like if you're ever working on fire, like Backdraft is such a fun movie because the fire is a character in that movie for sure. It like moves across the floor and it's like, oh, it's like making this like sound. Like it's like, like I think it's Robert De Niro. I think Robert De Niro's in it. He's just like, it's like fire. It consumes, it breathes. And I'm like, yeah. Fire is totally alive if you look at it the right way. Of course, they're firefighters, so they're trying to like extinguish it,
Yeah.
And they're just like, in order to kill it, you have to love it. And I'm like, yeah. I'm not trying to kill it. I'm trying to let it thrive. But I also need it to not like set the world on fire. I need it to be very contained because it's like, oh, look, this car is on fire. And sometimes I'm like, you're going to wander. But you can't wander too far because you can't escape the car, But I want the fire to feel like it's this character that's like moving, and like having access to like scripting can give you some really unique behaviors. And I prefer that really to like the slider, because like a lot of systems are like, you have a slider and you could go from 0 to 1. I'm just like, oh no, you boxed me in. And they're just like, oh no, what is Lauren upset about again? Because it's just like, if you give me access to where it can go and you let me make a little like, procedural function to do interesting things. On the best case, you get some really surprising behaviors. The worst case, your fire escapes and everyone's like, that's a bug. It's like my fish escaping. Like, they did so many wonderful things. Well, until they escape the water and then, they have to be, reined in. But if I can get hold of variables, and it's expensive. Like there's a lot of, you can't just have super smart particles and have tons of them. So my favorite thing is like, can I have super smart particles and I'm okay with only a few because they're going to do some really heavy lifting? Or can I have like tons and tons of really dumb particles? That's okay too. I love a system where I can pick between those two. I don't know how I would recommend someone getting into that other than I gotta be honest, I have not used Unreal a lot, but like looking at some of the Niagara demos, I think they're trying to move in that direction, like blueprints plus Niagara plus it looks like you can make variables and do interesting things with them. Maya's Mel scripting is literally just a blank box, which I think can sometimes be a bit intimidating. Like, I don't even know what I could do. But, just saying, hey, I'm going to make a variable and I'm going to store the position of this particle. And then if you can calculate the distance from where that initial position was, and you're going to be like, okay, as this value goes up, RGB equals something different. And then watch as it like changes color as it gets further away. And then you add forces to it and you realize that the ones that like escape, they've got a completely different color than the rest of them. And all of a sudden you're just like, if you can think unlimited in what I can do, like that's like what you want to like start to feel, because I think that's when you realize that the scripting thing is not just a real pain and instead it gives you an open ceiling for playing. And
just to recap on that idea is when you bring scripting into your workflow, you really are opening up complete customization to create whatever your imagination brings to mind, where often when you're kind of constrained with these sliders and sometimes with those visual node-based systems, which are very practical for artists that don't have the programming knowledge. You are limited in your options and you're constrained. So that's the power of scripting, and that's where you're really getting the MEL or the Maya embedded language in it. But as far as the learning portion of it's concerned, that's kind of a struggle because you went through formal education and got it through coursework. And now a lot of people are looking to online classes like Udemy, Coursera, lynda.com, all of these types of places. I didn't know if there was a specific one that you wanted to point out in, the introduction or entry level for new artists wanting to get their feet wet, or even like languages mattered because like there's a big push toward Python with that, and you having such a big programming background, being able to kind of like mentor or direct people who want to jump into this area and have that freedom.
That's a tough one. Python is such a friendly language to use, but it's not fast. We were working in C++ in school, and from what I've heard, a lot of people don't use C++ as any kind of intro course anymore. I think everything's kind of moved towards Python because Python's just a lot more automatic. It's going to clean things up for you. You don't have to understand registry pointers and reference. There's a lot of concepts. It's a steep learning curve. Once you get to a point where you understand the concepts of it, and you're right, it is kind of something that I got in school, and I'm trying to think of how to recreate that. Yeah,
you don't have to have the answer.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. But I think you would never be sad for learning Python because it's I use Python at work a lot if I just need to. Well, here's an example. Like, I want backups of my files, and there wasn't a good backup system. So I was like, hey, Python, look at all of my checked out files and just dump them into a folder for me every hour. Mm-hmm. I was doing that. And Python's like, oh yeah, that's real easy. I can do all that for you. So all of a sudden you can customize work that you need done to your files is so nice to do with Python. So you will not be sad for learning Python. And then I think that's an easier jump to go from Python into C or C++. I learned on OpenGL and it doesn't look very pretty, but you can just be like, hey, I want to make a particle simulation in C++ and I want to draw with OpenGL. That's what I did in college. And it is kind of a manual process. You can write a ray tracer in C++, and that was something I did in school, and you can find things online to describe that, and it is magic when you see your first sphere, because you've described this scene file. You're like, I have a sphere that's this large and it's in this world position, and then you have your camera, and then you okay, now I'm going to look through the camera and I'm going to draw every single pixel, and it's really slow, but all of a sudden you get your scene, you're like, there's my sphere, there it is, and you're in your little world file, and you're like, I'm going to move it 1 unit in X, and then you hit draw and you're like, wait, forever? You really appreciate how amazing computers are when you like try to do this stuff manually, like manually draw it. It's just like, wow, the engine has to do so much work to get stuff on screen. It's like, I'm not even mad that it like takes a while and I'm not in frame or whatever, because I'm like, I get it. Like this is tough. I empathize a little bit, I think, with the computer, because I've had to do some of this stuff like kind of manually. But yeah, you can find like code for ray tracers online, and then you can mess with it. I think once you realize that nobody says you can't do something, I'm not saying that it'll always like work out. Like you might get a sphere that's super wild. Like I remember like I wrote my own image processor. It was part of a class, and I mixed up the RBG. I said, instead of RGB, I said RBG. And so when I stored all of my pixels, the color channels were flipped. And so it like drew the image, and I was like, what happened? This is kind of cool, but what happened? And all of a sudden you're just like, what if I wanted this to be this way? And then you realize all of it is data, all of it is numbers, and it can do like anything that you want. And then you get into like storing, data into images and unpacking them. And you're just like, oh, the sky's the limit. So then I get really mad when it's like, here's what you have to work with. It's a slider that goes from 0 to 1. It's just like, oh, I want to be a powerful wizard, like just give me some access to some variables, So I don't know. I guess I urge people to go look for stuff like that, because once you see like what you can do, I hope we all start like going, the sliders are great when you're first starting out, but give me more power. I want more power. And if enough of us are saying that, then, then we'll collectively get what we want.
That's cool. Thanks everybody for listening to today's episode with Lauren. We'll be back next week with more on her. I was totally fascinated by her origin story in theater and how it led to storytelling into visual effects, along with all the amazing work that she's done outside of just games. So let's look forward to hearing the next part of Lauren's amazing story. Until next time, rock on.
Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You being here is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast. Today we're continuing our episode with Lauren Simpson's story. So grab some popcorn, sit down, and listen in.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Before you were working on Halo, I know that you were working on God of War. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that experience, because you were working both on cinematic and environmental FX. Is there a particular scene or FX that you're particularly proud of that you created? And if you could maybe talk about a big challenge with an effect that you ended up making.
Yeah, so there was one thing that wasn't planned that I got to do that I totally loved. I don't even know how it came about, but so I wanted interaction with the players so badly. I just couldn't find ways to like work this in. And I was like, can I do some effects that when the player is close, something magical happens? So she has this beautiful world. Like I loved the environments of God of War and the story. Like something they did so right was, I mean, you felt like there was a foundation to the story and the character and where we were going. And that was always there. And I so appreciated that. But some of these, environments, I was like, they look lovely, but I want them to respond to me. I want them to know that I'm there, And so I kind of went off script, and I have these little plants. I talked to one of the environment artists that had like these plants that had these little leaves that come off. And I was like, can we make them little insects, Because I think this was very like, Alice in Wonderland, moment where, she's in this environment that has a special magic to it, but it's little things are disguised. Like you think it's one thing, but it's another thing. And so I was just like, oh, if I I could do some little effects bugs, and they're real small. I mean, they're nothing, big and fancy, but they were like, yeah, go do that. So I had these little bugs that are on like these plants, and when you get close to them, they fly away. So it's like, they're not plants, they're actually insects. They've evolved a way to hide. But once you get too close, the gig is up. They run away. I remember someone saying, it's like, I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, I'm so sorry we can't always let you do those kinds of things, because that wasn't on any spreadsheet. That wasn't something that anyone asked for. I just got to play a little bit with an idea, and I had been used to scripting things myself, but it just wasn't something I had easy access to. So I had to get, the environment person to kind of make me a model, and then I had to get the designer to kind of give me an example of how to read where the player was, because it wasn't as straightforward as I was kind of hoping.
That's
and
awesome.
It broke. It broke a couple times. I was like, my butterfly insect plants broke, and it's hard when, again, it's not an important part of the game, but it's really important to you and you really like it. And, it wasn't like an easy thing to do, but there are times in God of War where you're like, you're in a boat and you get too close to shore and you see these little like insects fly off. And I'm just like, well, there we go. I wanted the whole environment to know you were there. If I'm completely honest, I would have loved for someone to just be like, hey, Lauren, this is your level. Just make it magical. And I'd be like, oh boy, and of course they're just like, okay, but you also have to check the boxes. I'm like, okay. I can check boxes, but just can you let me play a little bit? And that one was really rewarding to me. I will also say that I was pregnant with Jamie during that time too. So just on a personal level, it was a really tough.
Ups and downs for sure.
Ups and downs, because I was kind of ill, too. So not everyone has a rough time of it, but flying around in a video game when you're nauseated it's a tough thing to get over. And I was okay, but once I came back from maternity leave, it was like, we really need you to get things done very quickly. And that's hard. Corey, our producer, was super awesome. I need to message him and be like, Corey, thank you so much for talking me down from a ledge when I got really upset, because he's like, I know you're trying to get things as perfect as you can, and I'm here to tell you that it looks good. We got to move on, because I would get these concepts, and the concept art for God of War was just, it was just so beautiful. And then they'd be like, okay, we need you to do this thing in like a couple days. And I'm like, I will not be able to hit this art. Whoever made this picture, and I didn't always know, I guess I could have asked, but, I was like, whoever made this, they loved this concept, like there were these statues that were in, the underworld. They had all this sand coming off of them. And I was like, if I don't do a good job, it's just going to ruin the impact of it. And I fought for it. I was like, here's what I can do in 2 days. And it looks terrible. Please give me more time. And the producer was like, please get this done. And I was like, please give me more time. I remember one of the designers coming up and they were just like, this world was looking kind of boring. And now that you put this sand in, it feels so much more alive. And I was like, thank you. Thank you so much for telling me. It's like, I don't know, if you're not an effects artist and you see something an effects artist does and it really makes your life better, go tell them that they're appreciated, because sometimes they really get themselves in a lot of trouble for asking to do things that they're not necessarily supposed to take so much time on. So it's really great when you're appreciated, because you're like, is it my ego? And I try to check myself. I was like, is this just for me? Is this something that I'm trying to do that I can let go because, I want to look cool or whatever? Or is this something that I think is really important? And when someone comes by and is like, hey, you made this world better, thank you. And it's just like, I'm so glad that what I'm doing is helping you too, because then it means that it's not just for me, it is the world that the player is going to look through and experience, and it is important. And I try to make that choice is sometimes hard, and it takes wisdom, and I hope that I don't screw up the choice. So, but back to your question, a challenging one was at the very end. I don't want to spoil the game. Let's just say there was an important moment where these things were flying up into the air. And I knew it was really important. And I kind of struggled through the look of it. I came up with something that looked really cool. But I remember the cinematic lead being like, this isn't the right tone. And I thought about it and I was like, you're right. It's not like a rocket blasting into space. It's like, I'm so cool, you know? Because I mean, obviously as an effects artist, sometimes I make the mistake of like wanting the effect to be like really cool looking. And if I ever lose sight of like its purpose, you know, again, it's always a learning experience, you know? It's like, it's not just, does the effect look cool? It's like, what is it trying to communicate, you know? And I missed a little bit on that. And I kind of went in a different direction. I ran out of time and it worked out okay, but it could have been better. And I think about that effect, to be honest, like a lot. I'm like, well, if I'd have just put some more like dust to support it, like maybe it would have looked. And we had a technical issue where my effect was dependent on the environment wind, but it wasn't finalized yet. So when the environment wind changed, it blew my effect the wrong way and I have to redo it. And so like after like 4 times of redoing this thing, it didn't have as much love as I would have liked. And I got to get over that one. I think most people see it and go, that worked really well. And of course me, I'm like, no, but I wanted it to be like this and I ran out of time. And you know,
And that's the challenge for us as artists is
yes.
Our effects are really never done in our eyes. And, you know, the producer's like, looks fine to me. But for you, it's like, oh, one more day.
One more time. Oh, man, I'm constantly asking for more time. And it's hard. Yeah, just absolutely what you just said. We always want it to be more. We want it to be everything that we want. And it's not always possible.
Sometimes as artists, we don't always get the opportunity to start on an effect from scratch, but rather are asked to improve on something that's already been made. Can you talk a little on the subject? How can we approach that particular problem where we're coming onto a project mid-process?
I'm doing a lot of that right now. It's not unusual to have a first pass, get stuff in, and then have that be done by someone completely different. So, and then your task is to take something that's kind of blocked out, but needs more love. And it's tricky. I mean, I think I use a lot of my own opinions of what I would want it to be. I kind of look at it. I'm like, why does this not work for me? Or what is this missing? Like, it goes back to context all the time. That's why I'm always fighting for context. It's like, oh, you just shot this thing and why is the explosion not satisfying, you know? And a lot of times there are notes that are already written for you that like, hey, look, we got this thing, it's blocked out and here are the notes from the art director, you know? And then you start hitting like the things that they're saying. Sometimes it's a gameplay thing, like I can't see the smoke from the outside of the fortress or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, that's a pretty clear thing. I need to make the smoke last longer. That's clear. But sometimes the things that are more elusive are like, why does this not work? Like, what is it that it needs? Yeah, I definitely use those two things. My own thoughts, my knee-jerk reaction. I mean, it's easier when you're coming into it without, you know, having seen it for a long time. You know, sometimes when you're working on something, you can kind of get in a rut where your brain is just used to it. You forget what it could be. But sometimes it's not so bad when you get something that's already blocked out. Because sometimes the hard work is just getting the thing to show up. And it absolutely depends on the production in your engine. But it's like, okay, this thing is already going. But with fresh eyes, what do I think is wrong with it? And then what does the art director think is wrong with it? What does my effects lead, think is wrong with it? And usually that tells me what I need to do. I'm doing a lot of that right now. That's how I approach it, I guess.
Cool.
And I sometimes replace all of this stuff. Like sometimes it's just, I want to plus what's there, but sometimes it's like, you know what? I really need a completely different element. So it just, depends.
So I know most of your FX work is revolving around simulations and tools like Houdini and Maya, using programming languages like Python to script behavior. And I think your work for replicating natural phenomenon really is incredible, kind of like the torch fires that you did in Naughty Dog's Uncharted 4. But I did want to ask, I was just curious if you've ever done stylized effects as well.
I have not really done, I love them because, like, for instance, like Breath of the Wild, like the Zelda movie, like I only played a little bit. I'm so limited on time, but the things that I did play, like I love the shapes that they make. Like, the fire can be like very circular and then it becomes very like symbolic and abstract. Like you're going to feel very differently towards something that's a triangle shape as opposed to like a spherical shape or, something really long. And like trying to play with symbols as opposed to mimicking real life is something that's really fascinating to me. And I have never personally worked on any really stylized effects. But when I see them, I have a real appreciation for when it's working well. I think it's more symbolic and more abstract. And I hope someday. I think it's really hard because when have you hit your goal? I mean, it's a little easier when you're just like, how much of this waterfall looks like a real waterfall, and you have something fixed that you're trying to go for, but with something that's more stylized. When have you succeeded? And I think you have to rely on how you feel about it a little bit more than your sort of objective analysis of whether or not you've found the truth in the real thing. So.
Right. I often think like with realism, there are legitimate references that we can pull from and try and replicate or mimic as close as possible. But in stylized, often you're exaggerating. You're using the real life references, but you're really pushing them past their limits to create that almost like phantasmical kind of like larger than life kind of like feel, right? So you look at your cartoons and how they can really pull off some crazy stuff.
Yeah. I love looking at reference. It's easier when you're trying to mimic something real, I mean, you can go on YouTube and it's crazy what you can find. It's like, wow, there's a guy in a field with a flamethrower. That looks very dangerous. But thank you for putting that up on YouTube, because I wouldn't have thought that there's a whole lot of dripping fire where the fuel is kind of inefficient with that thing. Mm-hmm. I should have mentioned this before, but it's like when you're creating a new effect, context of the game, but then also like, what is your goal? Like, what do you remember from a movie that's something you saw? Like, I like to use movie reference really rather than finding game reference, because I think often there's a little bit more detail to work with. So you can't mimic everything, in real life because you have limitations, in the game. Mm. But I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to find a truth there. Like, it doesn't have to be, even if it's like you're trying to mimic a real thing, like people will forgive you if you look at a waterfall and you find something out of it that you feel is really true about the essence of a waterfall, and you can communicate that. Like, they'll forgive you if you don't have every single splash that may have happened for this waterfall. I think that probably works for stylized effects as well. Like, what is the essence of what it is that you're trying to do? Kind of like a caricature. When you see a caricature and you like laugh so hard because you're just like, oh, it's not real, but you've really found the truth of this person or this expression or something like that. I don't know, something about our brains just love that. We love, like, we'll forgive it if it's not perfectly in line with reality. We're trying to look for the truth that this artist saw, and for them to communicate their point of view, and for you to see the same truth that they did. It's great. And I see that as a player too. And I'm like looking around, I was like, that's not how I would have done that effect, but I see what you're trying to tell me. And what a beautiful thing that I get to see another artist's point of view.
Cool. For a period of time, you did get to work on Uncharted 4, and that was actually your first time at a game studio as a contractor. I was wondering, how was it different from being a full-time staff member? What's the life as a contractor like?
This is tough because Naughty Dog, I thought they treated their contractors like full-time artists. Like, I was really appreciative because it was my first game job, and I had a huge dose of imposter syndrome. I was just like, I don't belong here. When are they going to find out that they hired the wrong person? It's like, I'm coming from film and everything's so different, but, people would come to me directly and they'd be like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. And what do you think? And I'm like, well, when you give someone the responsibility, they have the potential to just kind of rise to it. And you're like, no, I'm going to figure this out, and I try really hard to be honest and be like, I don't know how to do this, but here's my thoughts. And then I'm going to go talk to people. And I'm going to go figure it out. And they're like, great, that sounds great. And I was just like, wow, this is so much responsibility, as someone who has literally never worked on a game before. Mm-hmm. But it was such a great place because it was a very flat structure. They said when I got hired, they're like, look, we're going to give you a level to have as your own. You won't necessarily do all the work in it necessarily. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, but you'll be responsible for the experience of someone playing this level. And so, I had this series of caves and I was just like, oh, there's going to be all this like rocks and stuff falling. And the torch was like the big thing that you were going to do. So I started like R&D on that torch. And I was just like, there were moments where I was just like so scared. I was like, can I do this? Oh, and I spent a ridiculous amount. I remember when I got to Sony Santa Monica, they're like, wow, this torch is really cool. And I was like, yeah, I worked on it off and on for like 6 months. And they're just like, oh, that is not how we're going to do things.
Yeah.
But, I was very welcomed as a contractor. And I actually forgot that I was a contractor because when I was putting my resume together and they're like, so we're not finding your employment with Naughty Dog. I was like, oh, that's great. And I was like, oh, actually, I was through a contracting. Ah, shoot. Okay. I wasn't trying to be dishonest. I honestly, truly forgot because I was treated very much like a normal effects artist.
Cool. Let's flip gears for a moment.
Sure.
I know that your FX has not only been in games, but also film. In fact, you did get your start as a CG artist and FX animator working on animated films. I was curious, how different is making film from games, and which do you prefer? Were there any kind of real-time elements to making your simulations, or did all that process through render farms?
Yeah, I had millions and millions of particles in film. And then I could take those millions and millions of particles and I could even send them through another program that would create even more millions of particles through those seed millions of particles. And so it was just, and then you would sit there and wait for your stuff on the render farm to come back. And so I feel like it was, a little bit of a sprint and then like wait for your frames to come back. I'm like, oh, sprint, and then wait for your frames. And sometimes you'd have multiple shots going, so you'd overlap. But the pacing was so completely different, and you would generally have a week at least to do something. And no one was going to ask you to do something in a day. Like it just wasn't going to really work. So the timeline was just longer, and the visual quality part was, since you have the ability to make it as good as you possibly could through, a render farm, then you better make it as good as you possibly can, So yeah, it was very fun to make something really beautiful, but it was always going to be that beautiful thing forever. Once you like rendered it out and it was comped into the movie, it was, even though it's moving in time, it just, now that I think about it, it just felt a little bit dead to me, It wasn't going to ever be anything more, I guess. And so I think that's why I enjoy real-time effects in games, because there's potential for it to be something a little bit different every time. Like the more variation and the more that things can surprise me. And I think I keep coming back to that. That's something that I just enjoy.
Cool.
So much. So it is hard because I was used to that film timeline where I get, several weeks, and then if it's not good enough, then you just keep working on it until it's perfect, until they say it's good enough. And I do miss that time because I don't always get that.
That's definitely an area where the transition from film to games can be challenging for FX artists. Making that move.
To be honest, it's still a bit of a challenge. It's even after all this time in games now, I always want more time. But I remember when I first started at Naughty Dog, and I remember they were showing me these waterfalls that someone had done. They hit a debug option and it showed how many particles there were. And, I'd been making waterfalls in like film and just millions and millions of particles. And they're like, oh, this is how it works. And I was like, there's like 80. I use like 800 million particles. And all of a sudden you're telling me that you can get this kind of quality with so few. And then they were showing me all the shader tricks that were going on to make it look like, and I was like, this is amazing. I am so impressed with the amount of work each one of these particles is doing in order to make this. And it's funny too, because I learned a lot at Naughty Dog about the number of particles. Like you can't just always just throw more stuff at it. It's really, if it's a well-designed effect, you want that like negative space. You want the places where there aren't particles to like also work for you too. And you can't just make something look better by just being like, well, if I just 4 times the rate of this, then it's going to look better. And it's like, I had to learn that. I think I did this haystack effect at Naughty Dog, and I made every single like piece of hay its own little particle. And they didn't know it because they were just like, wow, this looks really cool. And then they turn on the wireframe debug and they're like, oh no, you cannot do this. And I was like, no, but it looks so cool, because I had like some scripting stuff to make some of them like clump up in interesting patterns. And they're like, oh, I like gave them like a heart attack to see how many particles I had used. So, I had to learn, like, I think that also is like, what is the essence of this? Like what it really forces you to think about what makes this look the way it does. What is the minimum thing that you're trying to get at? Because you can't just throw everything at it. but you really have to like spend time. Like, what makes something look like smoke versus steam, or and before in visual effects, you'd just be like, well, there's all kinds of fluid sims that you can run it through a fluid sim, and you can make sure that you put all the buoyancy in the blah, 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 and you can set up the physics world to be steam, and instead I'm just like, I have to understand steam in a very different way in a real-time environment versus the physics environment that I was used to, in film. And although all those physics properties influenced, the way I think about real-time effects, because it's like, if something's hot, it's going to rise, and like, how hot is the thing that I'm making? Like, how much buoyancy, even though I can't say the buoyancy is blah, 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 point, blah, blah, blah. Instead, it's like, what do I decide is the feeling of rise for this thing, and then try to visually program that in, as opposed to letting a simulation take over. So yeah. I made a lot of mistakes. They were great at Naughty Dog. They were like, we'll show you. Well, I mean, my effects lead was awesome. He would sit down. He'd be like, you've done this, and okay, here's why we can't do this. And he would explain to me here's the transparency pass, and I had no idea. Like, I'd never done any normal maps either, because I was like, well, in film, if you want a detailed rivet, you just model it, and instead in a game, it's like, you have to fake that in a way that makes it so that the engine can process all the geometry, and so that was quite a shock, trying to do lighting tricks that I never had to do film. You did the thing as brute force as you wanted, as you had time for. And it was so fun though to work on something and then just watch it update, just as you're working, like watch it update. I'm just like, I miss my coffee breaks while the render farm was chugging away on all the physics stuff I threw at it, because I had like time. I'd be like, okay, well, that's gonna take a couple hours to get a few frames of that. Sometimes you'd render on 4s, you'd be like every 4th frame, and that way I can get a gist of like, how off am I? I'd be like drinking my coffee and eating my frozen yogurt at DreamWorks. I had a really nice like area for like snacks. I gained so much weight, it was terrible. But I was like, oh, I'm rendering, it's time to eat Butterfinger topped ice cream. And then but with everything instant feedback, I was like, wow, I'm working like solidly all day. This is a lot more exhausting. But wow, look at how exciting that is to make a decision and then instantly see the results. It was super exciting. So yeah.
Cool. Hey, many people, when they see work from famous companies like DreamWorks, they fall in love with the characters. But what is your philosophy behind the effects that go into these animated films, like Kung Fu Panda 2 and How to Train Your Dragon?
I think what was hard is that a large company has to start to streamline the process so that, you got to sign a series of shots, and then you would kind of get them all into a good state. And then you would show the effects lead in a room. You would kind of like watch the render together, and you'd get notes, and then you'd go back to your desk and you would fix them. And it became a little bit assembly line, and I think it does depend on the size of the company. But, I loved the end product. Like my son will watch Moana, and I look at the water and I'm just like, oh, this is so beautiful, But I know the realities of working on that is, you're not seeing Moana singing and then making the beautiful sparkly water that's reflecting the starlight. Instead, you've got this, just the water, and you're really working on like, are the ripples like I've got this fake geometry to pretend like it's a boat. Like, I want to make sure that I'm getting the ripples from the, and you're not quite in the big picture of the film. I remember my mom saw, I think it was Kung Fu Panda 2. No, it was How to Train Your Dragon. My mom was in the movie theater with me. And I was like, honey, did you do the dragons? I'm like, no, I did. So I'll point out when some of the things, the movie theater wasn't super crowded. I wasn't bothering anyone. But, one of the characters would like walk through a hallway, and I did like the sconces, I'm like, oh, I did the fire. And I'm like, where? And of course the scene's gone. I'm like, well, it was the last scene. Like, well, honey, I missed it. I was like, what? And it was very quick. And you realize how much money is being poured into your eyeballs when you watch these animated movies. They're, because I worked on those little like, fire things like a long time. And I also had the added necessity of matching the fires that had come before, because sometimes you're not the only person doing the fire sconces. There's someone else who's already done a bunch of them, and you can't, make yours look drastically different, because when they cut, character's talking, there's a fire in the background, and then it cuts the other character, and if your fire is like wildly different, it's not going to work. So often you have to borrow all of their simulation stuff so that you're keeping step.
Yeah, because often when you're in like the film industry, you're assigned different shots from a huge shot list.
Yes.
And you have various FX artists that are working on different shots. And some of those shots may be the same effects. They just need to be replicated.
Yes. So I like Kung Fu Panda 2 had a lot of dust where character hits another character. It's like Kung Fu movies where like, every blow has dust that comes off, and someone else has already set up like a Houdini system, and your job is to make that system run on this sequence, but they don't really want you to change any of it. They want you to match what all the other, scenes you're doing. And it's okay. It's just, I think I was there for about 5 years. And I think after a while, I was like, I want to go where I'm making a little bit more impact. I was super grateful for them because, they trained me up and I really enjoyed, the work I was doing, but I wanted to be on a smaller team. My favorite moment at DreamWorks is actually when I was working on the TV show as opposed to the movie, because there were only like 4 or 5 of us effects artists. And we had to do a lot more stuff, because there just wasn't that many of us, so, and I also was a lot closer to my team, but once you get into these giant movies, they need to have everybody like be interchangeable and move everybody around. And it felt a little more assembly line. I remember when I was like talking about like, where do I want to go? And it's like, can I work on TV again? Can I work on do we ever do shorts? And they're like, no, we're not going to do shorts. And then they started integrating the TV production with the movie. So, cause they had like TV specials for Kung Fu Panda. And I was like, can I work on the TV specials for Kung Fu Panda? Because I want to be on a small team. I want to do more stuff. And they're like, oh no, we're going to just divvy up the TV shots and the movie shots. So sometimes you'll get a TV shot, sometimes you'll get a movie shot. And I was like, no, I was like, oh, this is so hard. Because I remember like sitting out in the big like garden at DreamWorks, like eating my free food, like next to a waterfall with koi fish swimming. And I'm like, why is it that I'm not happy? Am I selfish? Am I undeserving of like all that I have been given? What is it that I want? And what, and I remember asking if I could go down in hours. I was like, can you decrease? I can do other things outside of work. And that maybe that will scratch my artistic itch to do things. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And they're just like, oh, what? I'm sorry, what? And I was like, yeah, but it's just, can I have a 30-hour week instead of a 40-hour week? And they were like, that's not something we do. And I'm like, why do we have to all work so long? And they're just like, oh, what is wrong with you? And I decided I would just go off and leave. I wanted to do music videos. I wanted to just be like, I want to do these projects that are small, that I get to do more stuff,
So let's talk about those. I know that you like to do lots of things. You're very diverse in your talents and your passions and your interests. And while you have your core tenet in VFX, particularly in the real-time space now, talk to me about, let's start with the stop motion video that you directed in school and ended up winning an MTV U award for.
Yeah, that was such a fun project. But I stayed up like all night, like every other day. I guess I would have burned out eventually on that kind of schedule. But stop motion takes so long.
Yeah, tell us what stop motion is.
So I actually built the little characters in the video. They were real. We photographed them. So the basic idea is you take a picture of like a character in a pose, and then you slightly move the pose and you take another picture.
And this is like physically based, like you with your real hands was moving around like these little like clay or like cotton toys or something, or characters, I guess.
Yeah. It was, we had a little corner at Texas A&M. They had like a light studio, and I was like, can we use part of the lighting studio to like set up a scene? So, I mean, I actually like, made the props like with foam, and I sewed the little characters, and I bought this like little armature like from some random place in England. You know, we had a very small budget at the time. As a student, I was like, I've got thousands of dollars, and it's like, that is nothing. That's like that will be gone so quickly. We had to be very, very careful with our budget. But you know, I was like, well, maybe I could get like a real stop motion like company to like build this character. And they're like, we don't really do small projects for like $1,000. It's not gonna do anything. So I was like, fine, I'll just make it myself. So I like ordered the armature. I got this little skeleton that I like put together. I mean, if you've ever seen like breakdowns for like Leica, sorry, I just totally blanked on their name. I love Leica. They do a lot of stop motion. They're mainly stop motion, but they do some Houdini effects too. They've kind of become kind of a bit of a hybrid now, but it's real. I mean, you can see some videos online of like real hands like coming into the frame and like moving Coraline, and then continue, and they speed it up because it is like, you know, if you ever like as a kid like did a little flip book of pages where you draw a little person and that you try to make them walk and you like flip the pages. I mean, that you're drawing each one of those frames, and for us it's just, you know, you take a picture of your physical scene and you move it or change it, then you play the images back, and all of a sudden it looks like this little toy has come to life. When Jamie's old enough, I'm hoping he'll be interested. We'll have to make little Play-Doh monsters and just be like, okay, here's a little Play-Doh guy. We'll take a picture. It's like, what is he doing? What is he growing into something? And try to like explain like how you might change something and take a picture. And then when you play it all the way back, it looks like it's moving, and it's just the most magical thing. And I think what I like about it is that like some of the errors in CG, like when you mess up, it's not charming, but when you mess up in stop motion, it's still real, you know, like your errors look so adorable, you know. And I mean, obviously if you can't read the animation, if the character falls over and then you put it back up, and it's like we'd have that problem where we'd be making this character like walk across the carpet, and if he like didn't stick well, you'd play it back and you'd see him walking and go, it would ruin the effect of his motion and you'd have to redo it. So there was a lot of like 3 a.m, like being like, it doesn't look good, we have to reshoot it. Okay. You know, like I remember like if the feet were in the frame, I would tie rocks to the bottom. I probably like got rocks from outside. I was like, you're gonna stay up, you are not gonna fall over. You know, just trying to find every way that we could to like make sure we didn't have to redo work, because it could be very painful when you spend an hour on a sequence and you look at it and you're like, it didn't hold up, the continuity is wrong. Or the air conditioning would kick on, and then we'd have these plants that were hanging, and all of a sudden, like halfway through the shot, they go, and I'm like, no, you know, you'd go into like After Effects, you'd be like, you know what, we're just gonna comp out this part, and we're gonna just replay the frames that didn't have the AC on. So there was a lot of cleanup. Like, you know, sometimes if the character had to do something that he was just not going to be able to support his weight, we'd have to put like sticks, you know, or like toothpicks or something to like make it so that we could slowly have him fall. And then I'd have to go back in After Effects and I'd have to like clone out every single frame with the stick, including where the stick was making a shadow on the wall, and I'd have to clone out the shadow. And it was just like, there was so much After Effects cleanup work. And that would be what I would do. It'd be like 5 a.m, like the sun's coming up, and I'm like cleaning up like toothpick sticks. I did so much manual labor.
That's
but
like
a
huge like lessons learned going through your first real film, because you don't realize how important pre-production is in creating this kind of like mental checklist of, all right, let me make sure the lighting's okay here. And I saw that when I made my own first film, Pandemic Life, and I was thinking, man, if only I had known about this problem or that problem. But it made your next film or your next piece that much better as a result. But it's cool that you can be nostalgic on those kind of like issues you ran into.
I had no idea. You know, sometimes it's nice not knowing, because if I'd have known how much work it was going to be, it would have been hard to have gone through it. I think someone is like, well, I've gotten this far and I already know I want this thing to be finished, but oh my gosh, if I knew how bad it was going to be, I would have never started, you know? So, I mean, there's the part of you that's like, it's okay if you're ignorant, because, you know, you have that fire and excitement, it can carry you through. But it is nice once you, like if I did stop motion again, I would know, and I could probably make better decisions. So, I mean, and some things were just out of our hands. Like I wanted a shag carpet, but guess what? Every time you move the character, the shag carpet's gonna move too. It was kind of a tough decision. But again, we just left it. We're like, you know what? It's fine. If the carpet like wiggles, it's okay. Because again, I think those things, like when it's, the errors are still kind of charming. Like Fantastic Mr. Fox, when you watch that, like the fox's fur is like constantly like jiggling, you know? It's okay. It's still really charming. It's not something that ruins the world for me. So
cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your latest project, your latest venture. It's a music production, right? You recently set up this cool home studio. What inspired you to pursue that personal project, and where's it heading?
You know, I've always been a musician, and I have never found a way to work that into, you know, my professional career. And I wanted to do music videos because I think that sort of scratched that itch a little bit, where I'm like, I want to do visual effects, but I want music to be like a really big part of it. And of course, in a game, there's audio and there's sound effects, but, you know, oftentimes it's done after I'm finished, so I don't even get to, you know, hear all the audio that will add more to what I'm doing. And there has been so much like advancement in like home, like recording productions. I mean, on my laptop, I can just plug in an audio interface. And I think what makes a difference now, as opposed to like when I was in college, and I tried to do this in college, it just didn't go very well because I didn't know what I was doing at all. And the stuff I made was not great sounding. You know, I was trying really hard. I was like, this does not sound like I imagined. On YouTube, there are so many people like who can just explain to you every single thing that you could ever think of. Like, you want to watch a video of the top 20 guitar solos? Yeah, it's totally there. If you want to see how an audio interface works with Cubase, I'm using Cubase, you know, you can just sit there and watch like tons. I mean, there's so much information and so many wonderful people like taking their time to explain how things work. I've always dabbled in like, you know, guitar, and it's never really sounded right, you know, but you could just go watch somebody's like channel on like how to make your guitar sound like it's plugged into some massive amp. And, you know, for like $100 you could get an amp modeler, which I mean, in college that would have been hard to swing, but you know, now I'm like $100 to make it sound like a really cool like guitar, like, you know, and you could just sit there and you could, it's like, wow, that sounds like it's a very expensive amp, at least to my ears, and it's all simulated in the computer. And so all of a sudden I think these things are within reach, and you know, as part of me it's like, oh, why are you doing this now? You're too old, you already have a career, you know.
Yeah.
But I think
it's never too late. It's never
too late, right? It is too bad that sometimes, you know, there's always like the stories of like, you know, oh, the young prodigy who, you know, is only this old and they're doing this thing. It's like, why don't we see more videos of like, you know, someone who's like 70 years old has like found their calling and something like I want to hear those stories, you know, because I think sometimes the narrative kind of becomes like, well, once you reach a certain age, well, you're not all that useful anymore and your creativity dies and blah, blah, blah. I was like, it doesn't have to be that way, you know. Like I found this like Japanese like metal band, they're all like 60 years old and they are just rocking out, and I'm like, that is awesome. That is the thing that I want to see more of. It's like people who like just sort of refuse to like give up on their creativity and go for it. And it's hard because I have my son and I have a mortgage, and you know, and there's a lot of adulting things that have to be done, you know, that kind of take you away from being a creative person. But I also think just being at home because of the pandemic, it's like, you know, I don't have to commute. Can I work that time into like something that I've always wanted to do? I listen like on Spotify. Like I wish I'd had Spotify in college because I could just listen to anything that I want. I found so many things that I've never heard of before that I'm like listening to this and I'm like, what category is this? You know, like I've been listening to like a lot of like metal shoegaze stuff, and I'm like, I love this. I didn't even know this was a thing, you know. And then Spotify was like, well, have you ever heard this? And I was like, I haven't heard this either, you know. And all of a sudden, it's like there's a place for everything. Like there really is. I mean, I think when I was younger, I always thought, well, I don't make music like everyone else. Who's going to listen to this? And I think as I get older, and I'm like, at the end of my life, would that be a good enough excuse? No, that's not. It's like you go make stuff, because that's an important part of being a human being, is to be creative and to continue learning about the world and never have that stop. And if it's just 5 friends and your mom listening to your music, that's okay, because it is about, okay, yes, you want to produce something that reaches someone, but also how does that affect you, yourself? Like when you're making something or you're creating something, that changes you. And then that's important too, It's like the next time you hear a song and you have a new appreciation for it because you sat there with your guitar, like trying to get this stupid arpeggio, and then you hear it in a song, you're just like, oh, they make it sound so effortless. I never really noticed like all these guitar arpeggios. Now they're everywhere, And I think that happens in effects too, when you're like working on leaves, or something like natural, and you're like, okay, how does a leaf really move? And you're like looking on YouTube and there's so many videos of leaves. And then you go outside and you like see a leaf fall. And you're just like, I've never noticed it the way I notice it now, because say they're like, oh, we don't want your leaf effect. It doesn't even matter, because now my perspective has changed and the way I look at the world has changed. And that's an internal process that is so important. I think there's a lot of emphasis on like what you produce and like, what can you show for this, and I think it's just as important to think about like, how am I changed by making art or being creative? That's just as important. So I hope that answers your question.
Are you ready for the lightning round questions?
Lightning round. Do.
Quick and easy, just like visual effects.
Okay.
Okay.
For 200, lightning round. No. Okay, now I'm being really silly.
I'm trying to remember where that's from. Is it Family Feud? No.
I like Jeopardy. I remember like as a kid like watching Jeopardy, and I was just like, how do they know all this stuff? I still don't know all that stuff. I was like, when I'm older, maybe I'll be good at Jeopardy. I'm still really bad at Jeopardy. There's so much about the world that I don't know. I think that's what's hard, is just like, you just assume that like, as you get older, you just know stuff, And I was just like, as I get older, I'm just like, no, I found that there's so much more to know than I ever thought was there. And I'll never scratch the surface of it. I have to be okay with that. I have to be okay not understanding the world as much as I thought. But then it gives me a lot of, grace to extend to, I think, everybody else, that we're all just, it's okay. We don't have all the answers. We don't know everything. And that we have to be accepting of that. So.
For sure.
But back to the lightning.
What is a perfect one-day getaway in Washington and the surrounding area? Washington State.
Yeah, I saw this question. I was thinking about it. I was like, I sometimes live vicariously through some of my friends who post on Facebook, like on their hiking trails. And like a friend of mine went to Mount Rainier and like stayed in a little cabin. And I'm just like, oh, if I could have time to go do that, that would be great. Because there's so much like just beautiful, unspoiled like nature around here. Of course I say that, and there's all these fires going on. I think that's what's hard is like, I feel really heavy sometimes about like all the things that are going on in the environment, because, I appreciate all the natural beauty, and it hurts to like hear all the things that are destructive that are happening. And so, yeah, I hate to say that I haven't had time to do that, because it is something that I think we all should appreciate and go out and do, because I think that'll make us want to preserve it. And I did go on a little vacation very recently to a place called Seabrook that had a very interesting, like raw, like beach. I mean, because Seattle's kind of on the water, but it's in a sound, so it's not like right on the ocean. But this was like raw, like beach, ocean, like big waves and like, crabs that had been obliterated by the birds and bird feathers everywhere. And it was not crowded, so it would seem kind of safe, with the COVID stuff going on. It was really foggy and misty, and there weren't any people there. So you could kind of wade out into the water. It was freezing, but I was like up to like shin water, and I was like, I could do this, because my son wanted to also look at the ocean. But I was looking out, and it's just like, it felt like the edge of the world. And I don't think everyone loved that beach, because I was with some other people and they were just like, this is not what I expected. And of course I'm looking at it, I was just like, this place is beautiful. I don't think anyone else really thought that. Everyone was like huddled in blankets. Like we tried to like make a little fire and, in the sand pit.
Yeah.
And I think my son was looking at me like, I'm cold, so we didn't like last very long on the beach, but
one woman's trash is one woman's treasure.
Yes, right. And I just thought it was full of trash. It was funny too, because I took my iPad and a microphone and I'm like, I'm going to record ocean sound. And I'm sure they're like, there's Crazy Lauren wading out into the ice freezing water, talking about how much she loves, this crazy raw beach that is not warm. But I loved it. I thought it was really nice. And the town Seabrook has a very interesting, like Americana, like someone described it as looking like a set from like the Gilmore Girls. And it was funny because my first thought was it was too perfect, and I was like, this is where the murders happen. Because I was just like, dun dun dun. There's something like oddly too perfect about it, but it actually was a nice little town. And we all put on like masks, and it was kind of fun to go get pastries.
Just to get out.
Yeah, just to have something different. I was really worried though, because I was just like, is this on the list of things that, will be our undoing? Like, it's like, we shouldn't have taken that trip to Seabrook because now we're all sick. I will say my son got a cold afterwards, and I was like, but was it worth it? Maybe we shouldn't have gone. It was just a simple cold, but I'm just like, obviously it could have been something.
Could have been much worse.
Yeah, you could have gotten COVID, and then we all would have gotten COVID. And it's just, and then like my heart stops. It's like, did I make a bad decision? I think that's what's hard right now, is trying to assess the risk of like getting away, because part of me knows that I really want a change of scenery. I'm just like, I miss different smells. I like ordered a whole bunch of random perfumes, because I'm just like, I keep smelling my own house all day and I'm bored of it, and I was like, oh, this is like some sort of strange juniper thing. Oh, it smells really nice. I like ordered a bunch of things. I never thought about that until I don't really go anywhere. I literally don't go anywhere.
Yeah, I think a lot of us. What video game or app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
I don't use many apps anymore. My son does though. So, I was talking about this earlier. He has this app that shows the planets, and I'm mesmerized by it, because I was like, what I wouldn't have, I would have loved to have had a solar system app as a 4-year-old, because he could like use his finger to like spin around and like see the solar system from different angles. That's just something I didn't have as a kid. So I guess I'll kind of watch him play, because I have to help him a little bit, because he like gets into the menus, and I'll be like, no, we're going to look at Mercury. We're going to click on it. And of course he's like, no, Mommy, stop it. I was like, Mommy knows how this interface works. Like, just let me show you, and of course we fight over the app a little bit. I was like, no, I drive. And he's like, no, Mommy, stop it. I was like, this is so cool. You could just zoom in on the planet and like, scroll around on it. Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's really simple. And I think it's because I haven't really been looking at apps on my phone. I used to use GarageBand on my iPad a lot. I use GarageBand to record the ocean sounds, which is pretty cool, because I'm like, microphone, click into iPad. I was like, look at me, I'm like a mobile sound studio. And of course I didn't have anything to block the wind, and I was like trying to like block I was just like, well, I definitely don't know everything about audio recording. So
what is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
Oh yeah, I saw this question and I thought about this. I have been making these enchiladas for like, I don't know, since I was in college, and they are so dead simple to make. I love them. It's literally like a tub of cream cheese, a can of black beans, and saute some chicken and then kind of add that in there, and a jar of like taco sauce. So like I use like Ortega taco sauce, and it makes this like goopy, like, delicious mess. Oh, add cheese to it. So it's cheese too. Cheese, cream cheese, black beans, chicken, and taco sauce. And then I just throw it in a burrito thing. And then I roll it up, put it in a little baking dish, and then drizzle cheese, or sometimes I put like tomatillo sauce on top.
That sounds so good.
It's so good. And it's like so easy to make. And you can make an entire dish of enchiladas and they reheat, really well. And it's dangerous though, because it's a lot of cheese, but it is my favorite thing to make because I have it memorized and it's so forgiving. Like, well, we have half a jar of taco sauce. It's like, it probably tastes pretty good anyway. I mean, with that much cheese, you just can't go wrong. And I do like those sorts of recipes that are forgiving.
What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
I read a lot, and I usually have like 4 or 5 books going at one time. Favorite one is kind of tough. I finished Wuthering Heights very recently.
Is that Emily Bronte?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, one of the Bronte sisters. To be honest, I think it was Emily. It's so dark. It's like very beautiful and dark and kind of, it's just a fascinating story. And, I actually decided to read it because I've been doing this, I've been composing some music, and one of the songs I'm working on is a bit of a retelling of a story that I really like. That's a Ray Bradbury story about a monster that visits a lighthouse, and it's like such a cool short story. And I remembered that Kate Bush, she's the singer, she did a song about Wuthering Heights. And I was like, I don't want to read Wuthering Heights. And then I want to listen to the song that she came up with after reading it. And I actually, after I read the book, I was so surprised. I was like, wow, that is not the song I would have written from this book. And I thought it was so interesting because I wanted to see how she came up with her song from this book. And to be honest, I still don't know. It's not what I would have expected. But I don't think I would have read Wuthering Heights if it hadn't have been for her singing about Kathy and Heathcliff. And then I read it, I was like, whoa, this is not the Kathy and Heathcliff I got from
It's funny how, like, whenever we read, we always interpret it differently from others because our imagination just takes those places. And often when you make movie or video game adaptations, you're like, well, I wasn't expecting that, or I came out disappointed. What was it, like The Hunger Games is what my girlfriend's reading through right now. And like, there's so much more detail involved in the book than there is in the movies. You miss those things.
Yes. The one book to movie translation that I really like, Jurassic Park, was a really good book and it was a really good movie. Yeah, I feel like they did a good job with that one. But yeah, most of the time it's, I prefer the book because there's just so much more going on. After reading Wuthering Heights, specifically to see how Kate Bush interpreted it, it does remind me that we are all such special, artistic creatures that we're going to react and respond to things so differently. What a wonderful thing that is, that that everyone's response to something, because it is unique to them, that all the more reason that we should all be making as much art as we possibly can. I want to know what her point of view was with this book, or what maybe I'm not even interpreting her point of view exactly how maybe she's like, no, you're getting the wrong thing by listening to my song that is my interpretation of this book. And it tickles me. The whole human response to stimulus is just all so different and wonderful. So,
Favorite video game visual effect you're jealous of that is not your own?
Yeah, I was thinking. I've been playing Death Stranding, off and on. It's going to take me forever to get through the games. I just don't always have a lot of time. I love the time fall sequence. I think I'm very drawn to darkly beautiful things, and that game is just full of that. And this rain is falling and you see the flowers blooming and dying, and I'm just like, oh, this is just such a beautiful effect, and then all the stuff comes out of the ground, and it's dangerous in the game, you're trying to get away from it, so I don't always have a time to oh, look, what a beautiful thing, and then get sucked down into the muck, so but I think it's so successful, and being like, oh, no, and you're smashing all the buttons, and it's just it's pulling you down, and you feel so slow. It's just wow, this is such a successful thing, I think. There's these ghosts that are attached with an umbilical cord. I love the title, Death Stranding, you're stranded on a beach, but it's also everything has these strands, you have these umbilical cords connected to everything. absolutely love the aesthetic of that game so much. I mean, I could just play in that world, and depending on how I feel, have a different kind of response or reaction to it. And that's the kind of world that I really enjoy. That it, people are like, well, what is he trying to say? It's like, I don't know, but I feel something. And that means that I want to spend time there. I wish I could work on a darkly beautiful thing where you're both like, oh no, it's dangerous. It's like, but it's so beautiful. I'm really not sad that I died because I really wanted to see this.
Yeah. Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or people looking to get into the industry?
Yeah, I see a lot of people going through tutorials. Like they were like, I want a job in VFX. So I'm going to go through all the tutorials. I'm going to do exactly what they say. I'm going to get my job and I'm going to have success, And you can do that. It's not a bad route, but, I think it goes back to my thought that all of us having our own unique point of view and unique, experiences. Don't discount the time you spend walking in the woods or reading a book that has beautiful descriptions of, the world or the environment or sci-fi, fantasy, any of it will go into making you a unique artist, and that it doesn't always have to be the exact path. I don't know if it interests you. I think it's speaking to your heart in a way that means that it's important. So, I think when I was younger, I was like, well, if I have a goal, that I map out my plan and I do all the things that are my goal, and then I, accomplish my goal. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I do think there's an awful lot of life that is important too. And I think that's something I'm trying to work in as well, that, watering my moss garden gives me time to think, and I'm watching this water mist, and I think it's kind of like a feedback loop, you work on a thing, but then you producing something, but then you want things to come in. Then that makes you produce something different. Then you have things come in, and then you produce something. And I think there's just this cycle of maybe if I hadn't been in effects, I would be watering my moss garden and I wouldn't notice the mist. I wouldn't look at how is that rainbow working? I move my head like this, it's like, isn't that an amazing thing? And don't accomplish your goals and figure out a way to map out what you want, but also leave yourself room to experience life, because that's what's going to give you depth and point of view that is not like everyone else. And if you can find a way to allow your subconscious to feed you ideas and watch movies, read books, go outside, all of it. Read the wrapper of the chewing gum and and unlock the secrets of the universe. It's just, I know it's hard because there's a lot of pressure on time. It's I remember I was like, I'm 27 years old. I have never had a real job. But also, I stopped and started, I didn't get into games until I was kind of hitting rock bottom at Starbucks, putting timestamps on muffins, and I was like, why did I leave film VFX? What have I done? I left this well-paying DreamWorks job to put stickers on muffins at Starbucks because I haven't found any VFX work in a while, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I remember I don't know, I was putting these day stickers on these muffins to make sure that we didn't sell anything old, all of a sudden Kermit the Frog came on the intercom he was singing, Rainbow Connection. And it's the lovers, the dreamers, and I was just, and I was listening to her, I started to get really teary-eyed. I'm just I don't know. And I remember the girl at the bar was like, is there a problem, Lauren? I was like, no, just Kermit the Frog's making me cry. And I don't know what I'm doing in my life. And I didn't say any of that. And I was like, no, I'm just tired. It's fine. That's fine, but that's okay too. If you end up at Starbucks and it's fine, the smell of coffee is great, and it didn't ruin it for me, so yay, And a friend of mine was at Starbucks and was like, Lauren, what are you doing at Starbucks? I'm like, I'm trying to make rent. Don, I don't know. He was a colleague of mine. He was in the same program. He was like, well, you should really think about games. I'm like, well, they're not going to take me. I'm in film. They're not going to take a film person. I don't think that's gonna. And he's just like, just apply. And I was like, I love games. I just, do you think it would work? He said, do it. Just do it. And it was such a random event. And I think about that, and I was just like, what if Dawn hadn't to come into Starbucks and suggest that I go into games? I don't know. There's a lot of luck and things that happen. That
serendipity.
serendipity for sure. Yeah. I remember I was like, because Kojima had like opened up like down the street, and I was super excited. I was like, well, sure. You know, and I got an interview, and it was funny because like the security guard who was like out front at Kojima was the same person who was always going to Starbucks, you know, and I felt kind of awkward because I'm like, I give you your coffee every day. I know what you order, but I'm actually here to interview for this game studio. And it was so wild. And it was funny because I was so bummed because they ended up shutting down. Like, I thought I was like, for sure, because they were just like, we're really looking for more film people. And I was just like, this is great. It's like, but you're going to have to realize that we don't have millions of particles for you to use, you know. And I was like, oh, whatever, I can do it, you know.
So what are you most excited?
I was just gonna say, after that, I just sent my reel everywhere, and I ended up at Naughty Dog as my first job, which is just wild to think about. I couldn't have planned that. I couldn't have planned any of it, really.
So what are you most excited about for the future of visual effects?
You know, I am still stuck on the whole like VR performance theater stuff. I gotta be honest. I someday hope that that's a thing. You know, I always hear about like, you know, music videos that are in VR. And again, I read and hear about them more than I experience them. I like Bjork a lot, and she's always really pushing the boundaries of like what's possible. And I heard that some of her like traveling like shows and things have like a VR music video where, yeah, apparently you can get like really close to her as she's singing. I was like, what would that be like? And I was like, what would that be like in a game? Like, it has to be something different. Like, there's a language of film, there's a language of games, but like, what is the language of VR? Like, what is it that it's so interesting because I have done some VR demos, and just opening and closing a drawer is like really fun, you know? Like, if you had a game and you were like, this is a kitchen, you'd be like, lamest game ever. But somehow you're in this like VR world, and you're like, I can, with this floating hand, put this thing in a microwave and hit the go button, and it has steam coming off. This steam looks really bad, but this is so fun. It's like I'm playing house inside a little VR world. And, you know, I mean, I would love to see, you know, game effects, like, you know, be at the quality that film has, but I'm also okay with it being its separate, different thing. Like, I feel like VFX is always like, kind of a chip on your shoulder, like, you know, I wish we were film, you know, and like film people are just like, game effects, they'll never be as good as us. And I'm like, I just don't think the comparison is fair, or even something that we should really even be going for, you know, because it's like theater doesn't go, I wish we had edits like film. They're just a completely different thing that, you know, I love seeing live theater. But if you like, and I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, you know, if you take a picture of like the stage of a theater, you know, and you'd be like, why does anyone go to that? Look at the people, and there's nothing around, and there's just a stage, and yet in motion, in time, there's something about being present while live actors are speaking lines with, you know, such truth. It's such a beautiful experience, and it's not something that is supposed to be film, or it's not supposed to be games. It's not supposed it is its own thing. And I guess if I would wish something, I guess, for games and VFX, is like, don't try to be film. Like, figure out what it is that you could bring. And not every production is, but I hear it a lot where it's just like, well, I wish we looked like film. And film's like, oh, they wish we were games. Like, no. Don't do that. Don't find your own like special thing that you're giving a person that, you know, I want effects to be more interactive. I want all of it to be integrated. I want it all. I want like a giant engine brain, you know? Like, I remember like watching like the movie Annihilation, and I loved the part where they're like, the world is like using the things in it to make new stuff. And like, there's this moment, like, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but the, you know, there's like plants that start growing in the shape of people, you know? And it's so interesting and beautiful. And it's like, what is it trying to do? Like, and it's like, that's our natural way of like being, is that we're trying to figure out like, what does this thing want? Or what is this? We attach so much meaning to everything. We can't help but do that. And it's like, if you could get games to like respond to people. If you were in like some game and then all of a sudden you like shot this creature because you were scared, but you didn't really know what it was. And then later all these like trees start growing in the shape of this thing that you weren't really sure what it was. It's like, wouldn't that reflect the way you felt about it? Like, you might say, oh my gosh, the world is sad because I've done this. Or like, the world has given me more enemies and is telling me. And it's like if you could just make a world that would respond to people and allow them to sort of make their own conclusions about things. That would be really exciting to me.
It's a new idea for you to explore. Create your own VR game, right?
Yeah, I want a VR game that knows I'm there and becomes something. And then I have to ask the question, it's like, is what it became a reflection of me? Like, is this a moment of me trying to figure out who I am? You know, I want those things. Yeah. Yes, that's what art, I think, should go for, is to try to shake you out of the everyday and give you something to think about, to really like sink your mind into. And if that's where I want games to go. Because you couldn't really get that with the film, because the film is not going to respond to you. But a game can respond to you. A game can gather information and do something that you don't expect. And wouldn't that be such an exciting avenue to explore? Like, yes, of course I want fluid sims and I want everything to look great, but I think the real power is the ability to respond to a player and figure out what it is about our psychology that, makes us want to get in the Jeep and run over the stack of rocks. Why is that so fun? That's so fun. It's like, I want to exert my presence in the environment, That's something that I want us to recognize and really celebrate, rather than just be like, we just need more processing power in order to catch up with film, which is also, still going forward and we'll never get there. It's like, no. Please explore these ways that a game engine, if you're going to give it more power, I want it to have more power to assess the scene and respond. Like, that's what I want. So.
What question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
That's a tough one. I always love talking about fire because I guess it seems like a silly question, but like, what's an effect you really enjoy working on? I already talked about it a little bit because I just if no one asks me the question, I just work in things I want to talk about. Mm-hmm. I love how fire is like a character. And I think, if you haven't seen Backdraft, it's a little bit of a cheesy movie now, but there's some cool moments. And I think it has some amazing ways of taking something that you would not consider living necessarily, mm-hmm. and then putting it into a context of it being a character. So those are things that I love talking about. I don't know how you phrase that as a question. It's like, what's a weird thing you think a lot about? Maybe that would be the question. What's a weird thing that you think a lot about that you wish people would ask you and let you talk about? So I often, they called me Fire Girl at Naughty Dog because, I really enjoyed working on fire. It also so much depends on what's going to do. It behaves differently if it's a campfire versus a, some sort of alcohol fire. The colors you can get from different types of things burning mm-hmm. is, and of course you read stories, mythology. I mean, that fire came down from the gods and people were able to harness it and how much our lives changed. And, here I am, I'm putting fire on the thing. It's it's sort of like when I'm on a cruise ship, and I think about and I'm eating my buffet and I'm on my treadmill and I'm looking out at the sea and I was just how many people in the past have lived and died on these oceans, trying to explore. And here I am in my little exercise clothes. Okay, maybe we've conquered the oceans, but think about, again, context, that this ocean was feared and loved and that we don't want to lose that, and so I'm working on fire and I'm just this is the stuff of gods, have this, as much information about the thing. Of course, they're just Lauren, you're over by 3 days. And I'm yes, but I'm working with the stuff of gods. They're just oh, please just check the box.
We're going to wrap up here, Lauren. It's been really awesome being able to talk with you about all of these amazing experiences and all the really cool projects you've been able to work on. Are there any final thoughts or things you want to plug, anything you want to promote, personal projects, people, ideas?
I'm hoping by the end of the year, I want to have a song on Spotify so badly. If I had a goal, that would be it. So, and I think the thing I'm working on is maybe not going to be everyone's cup of tea. It's becoming kind of a strange metal hybrid thing that I don't know. I can't really plug it because it's not out there yet.
Okay.
I hope maybe I'll send it to you when it's finished. I think that's something that I'm trying very hard to do because I think it would make me happy. And
is there a way that people get in contact with you or just kind of follow what's going on in your life and stuff?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess right now it's just email, and I don't have a blog I do this thing where I'm going to blog my thoughts, and then I do 2 updates and then I forget. So I guess just email, lrsimpson@gmail.com. You can email me.
They may have some questions, so they just want to follow up on something you talked about on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, I guess, I mean, I'm not necessarily plugging anything specifically, but, I know some of your other guests have talked about how important other people are, to their career. And that's so true. I mean, I think back to all the people that have, helped me along, because I've been the new person so many times, and I try really hard, when someone's new, I'm just here's all the things I know. If this will help you, I'm happy to share, because I've been there and it can be so daunting, So my effects lead at Naughty Dog, Evan Cook, was so amazing. Teaching me so much from, someone who was only experiencing film, and all of a sudden trying to make effects for games without blowing performance or frame rate, he was so patient and taught me so many things, so it's so many people. And if I can give back, I absolutely will try. So.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening to this awesome episode with Lauren. She really is an amazing woman who is doing so much with what little time she has in her day. I have to give so much credit to all the parents out there that are juggling so many life priorities. You guys are true heroes, and you have my utmost respect. All right, until our next episode, rock on.